No one knows how many farmers, servants, cooks and carpenters are buried just beneath the sands of Egypt. Unlike their kings, all but a few have passed the centuries undisturbed. Once a barren desert, the Valley of the Kings became a busy, vibrant place. Hundreds of families lived in the special village built for the masons, carpenters, painters and architects who served the great kings. One of the strangest stories from Egypt's history comes from the Valley of the Kings. A woman took Egypt's throne and ruled as if she were a man. She built great temples and sent expeditions to far-off lands. But why, when she died, was her name erased from every monument in the country? What would you do if you found a secret burial chamber filled with golden treasures? When the archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered unimaginable wealth in the Valley of the Kings, he immediately covered it up again. They're empty now, the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. But there's still a lot to see. If you plan to visit, bring a good map to tell you where the mighty pharaohs once lay. Gangs of thieves looted even the most well-protected tombs in the Valley of the Kings. But until 1922, generations of robbers, adventurers and archaeologists failed to find one particular royal burial chamber which was hidden amongst the dusty rocks, the lost tomb of Tutankhamun. Here are the kings who ordered the construction of the Great Pyramids. To the ancient Egyptians, these men weren't just kings, they were gods in human form, who deserved magnificent tombs, monuments that would last forever. Of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, only the Great Pyramids at Giza remain standing. Each year, millions of tourists travel from around the world to see these ancient marvels. The mysterious Sphinx at Giza has silently guarded the tomb of the pharaoh Khafre for more than 4,000 years. This famous Sphinx, one of many built in ancient Egypt, lay buried up to its neck in sand until 1886. Over the centuries, the Egyptians built many imposing temples and monuments. Today, some of the newer ones, like the Great Temple at Karnak, are in ruins, while some of the oldest, like the Great Pyramids at Giza, still stand. Who first imagined a tomb in the shape of a pyramid? It wasn't a king, but a scholar named Imhotep, who served King Djoser. A physician, scribe and high priest, Imhotep is also the first artist whose name is known to history. From the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Central America, many ancient peoples built pyramids to honor their gods and kings. It took thousands of men, decades of work, and millions of stone blocks to build each of the Great Pyramids at Giza. This lifetime of labor created monuments that have inspired awe throughout the centuries and around the world. Egyptian kings had many wives, but only the most important queens were buried near their kings in magnificent tombs of their own. Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis, played many roles. As a hawk, he protected the pharaohs. In the shape of a boy, Horus shielded ordinary people from crocodiles, snakes, and the other dangers of daily life. If illness struck, medicine could sometimes help, but it never hurt to ask for help from the gods too. Sick people paid scribes to write to the gods, pleading desperately for a cure. Only priests could visit the shrines and make sacrifices every day, and only they knew the secret ceremonies and special prayers. So how could ordinary people please the gods and earn their protection? Imagine having surgery without a painkiller. Some Egyptian doctors may have used opium or other anesthetics, but for most people, having a broken bone or deep cut treated must have been agonizing. Each morning, priests left food for the gods in the temples. Many people, hoping to please a god, brought animals for the priests to sacrifice. To the ancient Egyptians, flowers, spices and herbs were more than just beautiful decorations or tasty seasonings. Such plants held mysterious and magical powers that could cure sickness and keep evil spirits away. Every day, Egyptians felt the hot energy of the sun. To them, the sun's movement across the sky and its life-giving powers made it the most important god. Priests and kings honored the gods at temples and secret ceremonies. Most people, however, worshipped at home, where they kept reminders of the gods close at hand. Cats, birds, dogs. We think of them as pets, but Egyptian cults believed these animals were symbols of the gods. In fact, anyone who killed a cat could be punished by death. Egyptian gods took many strange shapes, but some also assumed human form, at least part of the time. Like people, they married and had children, but unlike people, their offspring also became gods. Imagine having to remember the names of more than 80 gods. In ancient Egypt, there was a god for almost every purpose, from good harvests to healing. There were even gods to guard your liver and kidneys. From birth to death, a god watched over every event in an Egyptian's life. In a world full of dangerous animals, diseases, and other hazards, no one ventured far without asking for a god's protection. For thousands of years, Egyptians worshipped the sun as the king of the gods. Suddenly, however, during the reign of the pharaoh Akhenaten, all other deities were banished, and the sun became Egypt's only god. Snakes and lakes of fire threatened a spirit in the afterlife, but with magic spells from the Book of the Dead and help from the gods of the underworld, a soul could reach the kingdom of Osiris. Medicine from mummies. That may seem like a strange idea, but people used to think mummies had magical powers. If you had lived 300 years ago, a doctor might have given you medicine made of powdered mummy parts. Who were these people, wrapped in bandages and sealed in their secret tombs? How did they live, and how did they die? Today, by studying mummies, scientists can answer many questions about the ancient Egyptians and what life must have been like 3,000 years ago. Death, the ancient Egyptians believed, could not destroy a person's soul as long as the body was well preserved. But if a mummy rotted away or was torn apart by grave robbers, the spirit would then not be able to recognize its body and would be condemned to wander the land of the dead forever. It is possible that you might find a mummy someday, even if you've never visited Egypt. Mountain climbers, farmers and scientists still discover preserved bodies all over the world, in the mountains, in the desert, or in cold, wet marshes. Could you watch someone making a mummy, cutting open the body, removing the organs, scooping out the brain and salting the skin? Well, 2,000 years ago, a Greek historian visited Egypt and saw the process for himself.
First, they draw out the brains through the nostrils with an iron hook. Next, they make an incision in the flank with a sharp blade and extract all the internal organs. Then they clean out the body cavity, rinsing it with palm wine. They cover the corpse with natron for 70 days, but for no longer, and so mummify it. After the 70 days are up, they wash the corpse and wrap it from head to toe in bandages of the finest linen, anointed with oil.
A mummy case was not just a coffin. It was also a substitute body for the dead person's spirit. Brightly painted or covered with gold, the cases can seem almost joyful, and today they are some of the most cherished relics of Egypt's past. Cats, birds, and even crocodiles were made into mummies. Ancient Egyptians believed that these animals represented gods, and they were buried like humans. Archaeologists have even found special cemeteries that held millions of animal mummies. Mummies have come back to life in the movies. Along with Frankenstein and vampires, mummies are still among the best movie monsters you'll ever see. One mystery of ancient Egypt is not sealed up in a dark crypt, but sits out in the open under the bright sun. The Sphinx may not have put a curse on anyone, but it's still as eerie as any mummy. Curses and evil spirits. No one's ever proved that the pharaoh's tombs held such dangers, but there were real hazards in the dark crypts. Death shall come on swift wings to him that touches the tomb of a pharaoh. That was the curse of Tutankhamun, at least according to the newspapers. Was it true? Have you ever visited a haunted house on Halloween? If you think that was scary, imagine being trapped in a mummy's tomb all night. Before it was sealed in the tomb, the mummy had to be magically revived so it could eat the food left in the tomb and have strength to continue its journey. An Egyptian could not enter the underworld until the gods pronounced the heart worthy of eternal life. This person's spirit watched anxiously as a jury of gods observed the final test. Egyptians believed life went on in the afterworld. They filled tombs with golden treasures, beautiful jewelry, fine furniture, and food. Everything a person's spirit would need to enjoy comfort in that world. In ancient Egypt, a funeral was more than a farewell ceremony for friends and family. It was a formal ritual to revive the spirit and start it on the dangerous journey to the afterlife. Just as they had watched over each stage of a person's life, the gods observed every step of the spirit's journey to the afterlife. A river was the last great obstacle on the way to the afterlife. To cross the water and reach the hall of judgment, the person's spirit had to ride in a special boat, but not everyone was allowed on board. What made Akhenaten banish all the old gods and worship only Aten, the sun disk? Was he an inspired religious leader, or the head of a strange cult that tried to wipe out ancient traditions and take away the power of the priests? Egyptian priests did not lead simple, frugal lives. They had to take care of temple business, study religious texts, and perform daily rituals. In fact, the chief priests of the great temples supervised vast estates that brought them wealth and power second only to that of the pharaoh. More than just a king to his people, an Egyptian pharaoh was also revered as a god. The people obeyed a pharaoh's commands without question, for he held the power of life and death in his hands. No ordinary temple could honor the greatest of Egypt's gods, the mighty Amun-Ra. For centuries, pharaohs came here to pay homage to the sun god and to build their own glorious monuments in his shadow. Moving through a cloud of sweet-smelling incense, a priest approaches a shrine that holds a golden statue. He chants the sacred words and slowly opens the solid gold doors to reveal the god's image. Such ceremonies took place every day for thousands of years, but only priests and pharaohs ever witnessed them. Thousands of miles distant and centuries away in time from ancient Egypt, a new Great Pyramid rises 30 stories above the desert. A huge sphinx stares into the distance. Is this another mysterious ancient monument? For 2,500 years, Egypt was ruled by foreigners. 3 men, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Anwar al-Sadat, and Hosni Mubarak, have governed Egypt since the country gained its independence in the early 1950s. One God, Allah, now commands the worship of most Egyptians. 5 times each day, devout Muslims stop whatever they're doing, kneel towards Mecca and pray. Shoppers crowd the narrow, noisy alleys of Cairo's markets. Everything is on sale, from exotic spices and food to jewelry, baskets, and other handicrafts made by workers who use techniques that have been handed down for generations. The old and the new sit side by side in modern Egypt. In Cairo, one of the world's largest cities, ancient statues and temples stand in the shadows of skyscrapers and factories. Today, no one prays to the old gods at the crumbling temples and monuments. However, they now attract crowds much larger than those that visited them in ancient times, and many Egyptians make their living by showing off the treasures of their past. Ancient Egyptians would not recognize their country today, at least not in the crowded cities. But out in the country, along the life-giving Nile, they might still feel at home. The narrow Nile Valley is still Egypt's primary source of food. Despite modern irrigation projects and other advances, life along the river remains largely unchanged since the time of the pharaohs. In 332 BC, Alexander laid plans for a magnificent city to stand as a monument to his power. But he died, never having seen the new capital of the empire he conquered. Alexander ascended to the Greek throne when he was 20 and set out to conquer the world. Across Mesopotamia, the Near East, and the Mediterranean, he founded cities that bore his name, built grandiose monuments, and spread Greek culture throughout the ancient world. With its beacon and watchtower, the Pharaohs of Alexandria was a wonder of engineering. Its walls hid a complicated system of mirrors or lenses to beam the fire's light out to sea. But to this day, most of the secrets of the ancient engineers remain a mystery. Experts used to think that Egyptians painted people sideways because they had never worked out how to paint realistically. However, now we know that ancient Egyptian artists chose to paint people in a stylized way, just as many modern artists do today. You would probably be able to recognize many of the items in an ancient Egyptian toolbox. Their saws, chisels and planes worked in just the same way as the hand tools that many woodworkers use today. Egyptians valued fine woodwork. They fitted out their homes with ornate furniture, and many of them were buried in wooden mummy cases, which were carved in great detail. With just a piece of string, a stick, and a little ingenuity, you could build an ancient Egyptian power drill. All scribes were important, but one man, Imhotep, rose above his peers. Today he is better known than the king he served, and to the ancient Egyptians he became a god. What if you had to make your own paper? What would you make it from? The Egyptians found plenty of good material right along the banks of the Nile. In ancient Egypt, a person's last words were not spoken. They were written on the walls of a tomb. These words could help a person enter the afterlife, if the words pleased the gods. It was the scribe's job to make sure that they did. What do you see when you look at hieroglyphs? A strange secret code? Well, you're really looking at ancient Egyptian writing, letters and words that experts can read just like Latin or Greek. Knocking birds out of the sky with a throw stick was a popular sport, but in order to bring home enough ducks and geese for a feast, clever bird hunters used nets to catch whole flocks at once. To escape the scorching heat of the desert, Egyptians often headed for the waters of the Nile, where they could relax in the cool breezes and catch a variety of tasty fish. Dangerous animals, crocodiles and hippos, lurked along the Nile. Teams of hunters armed with spears and harpoons paddled boats through the shallow water in search of these deadly prey. Kings and court officials loved to hunt. In the same way as trophies are mounted on a wall today, paintings in the ancient Egyptians' tombs and monuments proudly showed how many lions, wild bulls and other animals they had killed. Do you know who invented the guitar? Many ancient peoples, including the Egyptians, created stringed instruments. The Greeks copied a type of lyre and called it the cithara. In modern times, it became the guitar. What did ancient Egyptian music sound like? No one's really sure. But wall paintings and carvings show us what it looked like. And if these dancers are any indication, the music had quite a beat. The clash of cymbals, the beat of a drum. Every band needs a rhythm section. Egyptian musicians used these instruments to keep the beat. Just like modern musicians shake a tambourine or click castanets. In ancient Egypt, rich people might have had pots and pans made of metal, but ordinary people could hardly afford such luxuries. When most people needed something to cook or store food in, they got what they needed from the banks of the Nile. It must have been easy to sleep in the clear, cool nights of the desert, but parents probably had a hard time keeping their children indoors when there was plenty of room to spread a mat out on the roof. We don't have recipes for ancient Egyptian food, but paintings show how people cooked and what they ate. Judging from the scenes depicted, Egyptians ate well most of the time, enjoying plenty of fresh fruits, vegetables, and roasted fish and fowl. The ancient Egyptians loved parties. A big event like a wedding or just a visit from an old friend was good reason to celebrate. How could you make dessert without sugar? Egyptians used dates, figs, and other fruits to sweeten their food. Most of us are familiar with bread that's a day old, but imagine a loaf 3,000 years old. Archaeologists have found such ancient bread in Egyptian tombs. It's too stale to eat, but scientists can study it and learn a lot about Egyptian food. Beer was the most commonly consumed beverage in ancient Egypt. Everyone made beer at home and kept it in big jars. Mourners even left beer in tombs, so a mummy wouldn't run out of it in the afterlife. If you've been to a barbecue, then you'll know how Egyptians cooked most of their meat and fish over an open flame. Fuel was scarce, so it was necessary to cook food quickly. Rings and earrings. Do you think of them as just beautiful trinkets? To an Egyptian, jewelry was prized not only for its beauty, but for its mystic powers as well. Kings and generals still wear ceremonial knives and swords today, but no modern blade is more beautifully made than the daggers carried by the pharaohs. What do you see when you look at the mask of Tutankhamun? The most famous treasure from ancient Egypt, or the face of the boy king waiting for his spirit to return? What would the real Cleopatra think if she could see the way movies have portrayed her? She'd probably be flattered that Hollywood chose such a beautiful actress to play her, and she might be shocked to see how popular her 2,000-year-old fashions became for modern women in the 1960s. Gold chains and medallions have been around for as long as people have made metal jewelry, and no one made gold jewelry more beautifully than the Egyptians. For centuries, these strange symbols on tombs and temples remained an alien language. In this sense, the hieroglyphs may as well have been from another planet, because no one could read them. What if you had to draw each letter that you wrote? Writing, drawing, even a short letter in hieroglyphs could take hours. Egyptian scribes, however, devised a way to write hieroglyphs much faster. What if every time you needed something written down, you had to visit a scribe? For all but a few wealthy Egyptians who had learned to read and write, there was no other choice. It's easy to recognize birds, lions, and people in hieroglyphs. But did you know the symbols were not just pictures? They could also stand for sounds and were put together just like letters in modern languages. Inscriptions chiseled in stone or painted on granite blocks might be fine for tombs or monuments. But what did the average Egyptian scribe use to write a letter? Paper, of course. These dolls may look like children's toys, but archaeologists have found such strange figures in many tombs for adults. Did you ever play with wooden animals? They were probably very similar to the toys that ancient Egyptian parents made for their children. The river was the best place to play on a hot afternoon. Everyone learned to swim and paddle boats, just for fun or to race for medals. Egyptians would have enjoyed chess. Paintings show them playing similar board games, among them drafts. They even made sure that boards and game pieces were left in tombs so they could play with them in the afterlife. The most popular game in ancient Egypt was a symbolic battle against the forces of evil. The winner entered the kingdom of Osiris. The Nile wasn't just a busy water highway. For many Egyptians, it was an important source of food. The Nile is still the best highway in Egypt. Sailboats crowd the river like trucks on a motorway, carrying people and cargo for hundreds of miles. Did the Egyptians only sail up and down the Nile and along their coasts, or could they have traveled much farther? One scientist believes they sailed across the Atlantic and taught the Aztec and Incan peoples many skills, including how to build pyramids. For many years, pharaohs had heard of a faraway land full of exotic spices, strange animals, and precious treasures. But it wasn't until the time of Hatshepsut that Egyptians sailed to the mysterious land of Punt. Bread and beans again. Many Egyptian children must have thought that when they sat down to supper. Egypt's rich farmland provided plenty of healthy food, but for most people did not provide many choices. While they were still young, Romans who lived in Egypt had artists paint their portraits. But these paintings were not meant to hang on a wall. They had a much more important purpose. Do you treat your pets like part of the family? Well, you should have seen how special cats were to the Egyptians. To adults, the Nile was Egypt's lifeline and highway. To children, it was a favorite playground, full of fish, birds, and other animals. Would you want to be married as soon as you turned 13 or 14? Raising a family was very important to the Egyptians. So as soon as a young man learned a trade and could build a house, he looked for a wife. What kind of toys did you like to play with when you were a small child? They were probably not much different from the dolls, carved animals, and wooden boats that children in ancient Egypt enjoyed. How would you like to spend hours in a hot classroom taking dictation, reciting long stories, and doing arithmetic? Well, that was what school was like for boys in Egypt. Where would you go to play on a hot summer day in Egypt? To the river, of course. Everyone learned to swim, paddle boats, and spear fish in the cool waters of the Nile. The Nile was one of the world's first highways. Almost everyone in Egypt could build a papyrus boat or raft to use as the family car. Parts of the river were jammed with boats, even in ancient times. Ploughing, building canals, and collecting crops from the fields were impossible without help from strong animals. Cows, donkeys, and other animals were the tractors and trucks of an ancient Egyptian farm. Good fishing spots must have been crowded. People in boats scooped fish out of the water with nets or caught them with hooks. All along the shore, children with sharp eyes and quick reflexes stood in the shallow water and speared fish with harpoons. Without the Nile, there would have been no civilization in ancient Egypt. The river provided water for irrigation, a home for wildlife, and transportation for thousands of people. Even now, 5,000 years after Egyptian civilization began, life along the Nile still follows the river's ancient rhythms. Rich soil and constant sunshine usually brought Egyptian farmers a good harvest. But even today, raising crops is back-breaking work in the sweltering heat. Bird hunting was a favorite pastime for pharaohs and nobles who took their families along for the sport. For many ordinary people, however, catching ducks and geese along the Nile was a necessary part of everyday survival. Bugs. Who would make insects into symbols of the mighty gods? Well, the Egyptians believed that a beetle pushed the sun above the horizon each day, so the scarab was one of the most sacred symbols of their religion. Cats, not dogs, were the Egyptians' best friends. Cats were used as retrievers by hunters, and of course they caught mice and rats. They were also the symbol of Bastet, the daughter of the sun god. People believed that without Bastet's help, crops would not grow and ripen. You can't always be sure what you're looking at. For instance, take a close look at this stone tablet. It tells a famous story of war and triumph. But can you guess what everyday purpose it may have served? Now, what shall I wear today? Most of the time, it was easy for an Egyptian to answer that question. Almost nothing. However, for a festival or party, fine clothes were as important as the right makeup and wig. Ancient Egyptians needed and used many of the same things that we keep in our houses today. Furniture, tools, and some items to help them look their best. You didn't need a blow dryer in ancient Egypt to keep your hair in the latest style, but a little animal fat came in handy. Can you imagine how it was used? Eyeliner, rouge and skin cream. Egyptian women and even men used cosmetics every day, but their use of makeup was not just for beauty. It served a very practical purpose too. Dark eyeliner cut the sun's glare, just like the black streaks that athletes and soldiers sometimes wear beneath their eyes today. Dwarfed by the Great Pyramids of Giza, the step pyramid left by King Djoser may seem insignificant, but it marked the beginning of a new age of accomplishment for the Egyptian civilization. They left behind the greatest monuments ever built, and they wanted more than anything to be remembered. But today, most of the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom are just names from Egypt's distant past. Of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, only the Great Pyramids at Giza still stand today. Modern admirers are amazed by the size and grandeur of these Old Kingdom monuments. But just imagine how ancient visitors must have felt when the pyramids were new. Can you name all the pharaohs of ancient Egypt? Probably not. After all, there were more than 100. And that's not even counting the kings who ruled after Egypt was conquered by the Persians, Greeks and Romans. It's hard to imagine how Egypt, a divided land of farmers and many kings, became a great united country. But this stone tablet provides an important clue. Tyrant or statesman? No king of Egypt is more mysterious than Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. Cleopatra. History remembers her as the greatest queen of the Nile. But what is the true story of Egypt's last queen? Egypt was too great a prize for Rome to ignore, but intrigue, romance, and a powerful queen kept the Roman army at bay for nearly 20 years. How would you expect to read the hieroglyphs? By matching each picture to a word? For centuries, that's how many scholars tried to solve the puzzle. But none succeeded, until French soldiers accidentally uncovered a mysterious stone in northern Egypt. The Rosetta Stone held a key. Egypt was the last prize captured by the most successful conqueror in ancient history, Alexander the Great. But Alexander never saw Alexandria, the splendid city that bore his name, or the monument built to proclaim his glory. Crumbled, burned-out tombs, bits of pottery, broken weapons. These are all that remain of Egypt's earliest history, a time when it was a land of many small kingdoms. Then one king conquered all of Egypt, and a great civilization bloomed in the Nile Valley. What do you think of when someone says Egypt? The pyramids? These famous monuments are the mysterious reminders of the Old Kingdom. Murder and civil wars rocked the early years of the time known as the Middle Kingdom. The pharaohs could no longer afford to build great pyramids. At first they struggled just to hold Egypt together. The kings of Thebes saved Egypt and transformed it into an empire. They drove the Hyksos out of the country. Then the pharaohs conquered new land, bringing back treasure and securing Egypt's borders. In 332 BC, a brilliant young warrior freed Egypt from the Persian kings who had taken control. The Greeks who followed Alexander the Great to Egypt once again made the land of the pharaohs into a center of culture and learning in the ancient world. The Roman legions took Egypt from the Greeks, but somehow the land of the pharaohs endured. Romans came from all over the empire, saw the magnificent and mysterious monuments, and in a way were themselves conquered by Egypt's culture. Five times each day, the chants of the muezzin call devout Muslims to prayer. Worshippers stop whatever they're doing, turn to face the holy city of Mecca, and pray. For more than 1,000 years, Egypt's temples and monuments lay neglected under the desert sand. Then a new conqueror, Napoleon, swept across Egypt and rediscovered its ancient mysteries. Like the Romans nearly 2,000 years before them, the British knew Egypt was a vital stronghold on the long trade routes from Europe to the Far East, so they made Egypt part of their great empire. Only in the last 40 years has Egypt once again become an independent nation. Centuries of foreign domination ended when the son of a mailman helped overthrow a British-appointed king. Nefertiti. Her very name contains the Egyptian word for beautiful. It's not just her lovely face that haunts us today, however. Mystery surrounds this queen, who worshipped the sun with her husband King Akhenaten, and then when he died, suddenly disappeared. Historians say that several women ruled Egypt at one time or another, but the most famous female leader was Hatshepsut. Once queen to a powerful pharaoh, she proved herself the equal of any great male monarch.
Some people say I should not have taken Egypt's throne. But when my husband, King Thutmose II, died, what was I to do? Let his son, a mere child born of a concubine, rule all of Egypt. I had to put on the robes of a pharaoh and declare myself lord of the two lands. And now my accomplishments speak for themselves. Do you deny that for more than 20 years I brought Egypt peace and prosperity? Do you not stand in awe of the great temples I built at Karnak, and my magnificent monument cut into the cliffs near the Valley of the Kings? But now I am an old woman. I fear that my nephew, furious at having to wait more than 20 years to become pharaoh, may not honour my memory when I die. What will he do to the great works that I built to last through the centuries?
He waited many years to take the throne that was his by right of birth. Did Thutmose III hate the woman who ruled in his place and kept him from his rightful position? In the movies, Cleopatra is always a beauty who lived amid great splendor. Today, those films that tell Cleopatra's story keep both her legend and the land of the pharaohs alive. Give me my robe, put on my crown, I have immortal longings in me. In Shakespeare's famous play Antony and Cleopatra, these were Cleopatra's words as she prepared to die. The great temple of Hatshepsut at Deir al-Bahri is one of the most elegant and majestic monuments in Egypt. But the leader buried behind its rows of columns did not rest in peace for long. Most women in ancient times did not lead armies, rule countries, or build great monuments, and few of them are remembered today. But every so often, a woman emerged who was so remarkable that she made a name for herself in history. You'd think a pharaoh could marry any woman he chose. But members of the royal family probably selected a bride for Tutankhamun, and their choice was his own sister. A bit of glass, gold, and some inscriptions bearing the name of an obscure pharaoh. These were the signs that led Howard Carter to Tutankhamun's tomb. "Can you see anything?" asked the people who watched as Howard Carter peered for the first time into the tomb of Tutankhamun. "Yes," he replied, "wonderful things." The country was in turmoil. Akhenaten, the king who had abandoned the old ways and started a new religion, was dead. Now a boy sat on Egypt's throne. What could Tutankhamun do? A king at age 9 and a mummy at 19. Tutankhamun's reign in Egypt was short and not very memorable. That may explain why his tomb was still untouched after centuries, while the graves of greater pharaohs were repeatedly plundered. A woman king? Yes, one of the greatest pharaohs of the new kingdom was a woman called Hatshepsut. When her husband died, leaving the throne to her young stepson, Hatshepsut took control. She declared herself Pharaoh, Lord of all Egypt. In Abu Simbel, far in the south of Egypt, stands a temple guarded by 4 colossal statues of the Pharaoh Ramesses II. They stood for centuries along the Nile. But in the 1960s, a new dam created a lake that threatened to flood the temple. So the spectacular monument was raised piece by piece from the desert floor to the cliffs above. Quickly, name a pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Did you think of King Tut? Tutankhamun was not a great warrior. He died young, and he left no children. Why then is Tutankhamun so famous? Most pharaohs were revered as gods, but one king called Akhenaten overturned the Egyptian religion, and for so doing, he was remembered by his people as the hated one. He was a man small in stature, but he pushed Egypt's boundaries far beyond the Nile. No other pharaoh won more battles or conquered more land than Thutmose III. For more than 20 years I waited, while my stepmother Hatshepsut, a woman who called herself Pharaoh, built temples and sent out trading expeditions. I listened and learned. And when the old woman finally died, I was ready. I whipped the army into shape and led the troops off to Palestine and Syria. My so-called generals always wanted to wait for reinforcements and supplies. But I attacked, even if it meant leading the army myself through mountain passes that were so narrow 2 chariots could barely squeeze through side by side. Of course I built temples, but only after I brought back captured treasure and prisoners, the real spoils of war, not just trinkets from a glorified shopping trip. The man who took the throne after Hatshepsut wasn't interested in trading with foreign lands. Thutmose III wanted to conquer them. Ramesses II may have been as bold as Thutmose III, but as a general he wasn't as successful. His greatest battle was a draw, and his reign marked the beginning of the slow collapse of the Egyptian Empire. During her long reign as pharaoh, Hatshepsut did not fight a single battle. But the expedition she sent to the faraway land of Punt brought back amazing treasures to Egypt. Soldiers armed with bows and arrows led an Egyptian attack. Racing in chariots around the enemy's formations, they fired rapidly and tried to cut down the leading troops. A sword or dagger was a soldier's most accurate and lethal weapon in close combat. If an enemy knocked away a soldier's axe or spear, he could grab his sword or dagger and fight off the attack with quick, deadly thrusts. Egyptians fought for many reasons: to keep their lands united, to repel invaders, and to conquer new territory. The armies were well organized and often led by pharaohs like Thutmose III and other great warriors of ancient Egypt. For more than 20 years I waited, while my stepmother Hatshepsut, a woman who called herself pharaoh, built temples and sent out trading expeditions. I listened and learned. And when the old woman finally died, I was ready. I whipped the army into shape and led the troops off to Palestine and Syria. My so-called generals always wanted to wait for reinforcements and supplies. But I attacked, even if it meant leading the army myself through mountain passes that were so narrow 2 chariots could barely squeeze through side by side. Of course I built temples, but only after I brought back captured treasure and prisoners, the real spoils of war, not just trinkets from a glorified shopping trip. When swung like a hammer, an axe could split a wooden shield or penetrate a metal helmet, giving even a small soldier a chance to defeat a larger, well-protected enemy.
Hey, over here. Hi, I'm Armos. Somebody said you want to see what life was like for children in ancient Egypt. Well, for one thing, I never have to go to school, unlike the children of the priests. But this is not to say I have a lot of time to go fishing and hunting. My father is a farmer, and I have to help him every day, planting, or weeding, or harvesting. Everyone's taking a break now, so I can show you around. Just click me, and let's...
All the gods were habitually embroiled in the lives of humans, and Dionysus, the god of wine, probably caused the most trouble. He tempted people to join wild parties, where they drank too much and worked themselves into frenzies, which they probably regretted the next morning.
Oh, go on, don't be a spoilsport. Have another drink. It won't kill you. Sorry? It's a little hard to hear you over all the lutes and lyres. No, I'm not just a party animal. Although, come to think of it, I do act like a goat from time to time. Whatever you've heard, I'm really not such a bad fellow. It's just that jealous Hera made me insane when she found out about Zeus and my mother. I still go a little crazy from time to time, but I can be jolly and kind too. In fact, it was I who gave Midas the golden touch, because he was so nice to my teacher Silenus. Too bad he didn't know how to use it. Well, that'll teach him to be greedy. But don't cross me. Orpheus made that mistake and I had my followers rip his haughty head off. Looks like I'm needed back at the party. Come on! Let your hair down!
Most of the gods spent their time lounging around their palace on the summit of Mount Olympus, eating ambrosia, drinking wine, and listening to Apollo play his lyre. Only Hephaestus, the god of the forge, worked away in his hot blacksmith shop, making magic swords and armour.
I know I'm no Apollo in the looks department. That much was made clear to me at a very early age. The other gods used to laugh at me. My mother, Hera, threw me out of heaven because she felt such shame and disgust each time she saw me. That sort of treatment tends to be very hurtful to a sensitive soul. Now, I'm not one to complain though, I just do my job. Every one of those Olympians lives in a glittering palace built by yours truly. But what do I get for my trouble? Not even a little respect. I thought I had a good deal going when I married Aphrodite, but it turns out the goddess of love isn't exactly infatuated with a hard-working god like me. While I slave away at a hot forge all day making magic armour and swords, she's running around with Ares, not to mention Adonis and Apollo. Imagine how I felt when I found out. Zeus would have blasted them with a thunderbolt, but I just got even. One day, when they were together, I trapped them in a magic net, and all the other gods had a good laugh at them. That taught them a lesson. Of course, they still laugh at me too, but just wait until one of them needs a suit of armour for a favourite hero. That's when they'll see it pays to show me a little bit of respect.
Known as Earthshaker and King of the Oceans, it was certainly very unwise to anger or cross the god Poseidon. Poseidon wielded a three-pronged spear and could stir the seas to a foaming frenzy, dash ships against the rocks, and make the earth itself tremble.
Everybody says I am always angry, making the ground shake, stirring up the ocean. Well, you'd be a little upset too if you had to put up with the stuff I get every day. After all, I am just as strong as Zeus. He just got the sky when we divided up the universe. So don't you go thinking you can push me around like some second-rate god. The people of Athens found out what happens to those who dishonour me. I flooded the whole city when they took Athena's bribe of an olive tree and refused my present of a magnificent horse. And if you head out in a boat, you better say your prayers to me first. More than once I've sent whole fleets to the bottom of the ocean by whipping up a really big storm. Now get out of here before I stick you with my trident!
Athena would appear to have received the most brains in the family of Olympian gods. In fact, when she was born, she is reputed to have sprung forth from Zeus's head. Perhaps this is the reason why the ancient Greeks regarded her as the goddess of wisdom.
Don't be deceived by my beauty, as so many people are. Logic and wisdom rule my life as they ought to rule yours. In a way, I'm more powerful than Zeus, for even the mighty thunderbolt thrower can't resist Aphrodite's mischief as I can. No, you won't find me chasing after muscle-bound heroes. You see, I learned long ago that even a goddess can't depend on beauty alone. I've battles to plan, laws to enforce, things to invent, an entire city to watch over. In fact, if I hadn't spent my time thinking, you wouldn't have ships, chariots, ploughs, or even pots. Consider that next time you wonder which god really deserves your devotion.
Musician, athlete, healer. Apollo was a multi-talented god. Of course, his perfect physique and handsome face didn't hurt his popularity. In fact, Apollo was even popular in Rome.
Do I look okay? It's not easy being the most handsome god on Olympus, you know. I have standards to keep up. Whenever I appear, people expect, well, an Adonis. I never get a chance to let my hair down. So many petitions to deal with. First, I have to shoot arrows at Agamemnon's army. Then the Argonauts get into trouble on the way home. Then somebody's sick. It's one thing after another. I know. You're probably thinking I get along fine with the ladies. Well, there's another myth for you. Beautiful Daphne begged her father to turn her into a tree so I would stop chasing her around. Even my music doesn't get the proper respect. King Midas said that little fool Pan played the pipes better than I can strum a lyre. But I showed him. I made donkey's ears grow from his head. Damn! Now I hear the oracle at Delphi calling me. I must fly.
Zeus may have ruled over earth and heaven with his powerful thunderbolt, but even he was unable to resist the potent spell of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. In fact, Aphrodite caused a lot of trouble, whether she intended to or not.
Sometimes I think I get blamed for everything, and all I try to do is bring a little love into people's lives. Even the Trojan War is my fault, if you believe those old legends. I just introduced Paris, the Prince of Troy, to Helen, the Queen of Sparta. How was I to know they'd run off together and start a 10-year war? And can I help it if I fall for every handsome god I run into? Living with Hephaestus isn't exactly what I dreamed of. I just want a little attention, and some flowers every once in a while wouldn't hurt. But day and night he's in his blacksmith shop, banging on some piece of iron. Sometimes I know how Zeus felt when Athena popped out of his head. Listen, I don't mean to be rude, but Apollo said he was going to stop by, and he can be a little jealous, so do you mind? I'll call you. Promise.
Ares, the god of war, was not popular with the Greeks. No city worshipped him. Even the other gods did not like him. It was not until he found the power-hungry Romans that Ares began to receive the worship and respect that he believed he was due.
Oi, you! Yeah, I'm talking to you. You thought you could sneak past me, right? Listen, I may not be the most popular god on Olympus, even my own parents hate me, but that doesn't mean you can just ignore me. I can make a lot of trouble for you, all right? Don't suppose you remember how I fought with the Trojans in the big war? We was doing all right until my mother, Hera, helped a Greek wound me with a spear. That hurt me in more ways than one, let me tell you. Look, you don't seem such a bad sport after all. Why don't we go out and stir up a skirmish somewhere?
Even the gods enjoyed a good joke, and the fleet-footed messenger god Hermes was always playing tricks on his brothers and sisters. That is, when he was not performing his main task, which was relaying important directives from Zeus.
I know I've got a message for you here somewhere. I picked it up in Argus only a couple of minutes ago. Ah yes, here it is. Thanks, I could use a breather. I tell you, this messenger business is a round-the-sundial job. Carrying messages all day, delivering dreams at night. Then there's the dead I have to drop off at the underworld. I never get a chance to relax. Still, I do manage to make time for a little fun. I love playing tricks on the other gods. Did you hear about how I made off with a bunch of my brother Apollo's cattle? Of course, I denied everything. He was really angry until I showed him a new musical instrument I invented. I called it the lyre. That calmed him down. He really went for it. What time is it? I've got to go. Hera's expecting a delivery, and believe me, you don't want her getting mad at you. I'll try to drop by again later. Bye.
Every Greek dreaded the final journey across the still black waters of the river Styx to the land of the dead. In the shadows of the underworld, even the gods were gloomy. Every year Hades, the king of the underworld, brought the cold, dark winter.
Welcome. Did you have a pleasant journey? Don't worry, your eyes will soon get used to the dark. Would you care for a libation? Can't you see I'm with a client? I'll get to it presently. Look, be a good fellow and see whether Charon's afternoon ferry's on time, would you? So sorry. Business is brisk these days, what with the Trojan War and all. Now, where were we, Most people wait a lifetime to see all this. Death really gets a bad reputation, but as you can see, it's not all gloom and doom down here. You don't get a lot of other gods meddling around for one, and if I do say so myself, the Elysian Fields isn't a bad place to spend eternity. Not bad at all. Of course, it wasn't always so nice, but I have fixed things up a bit for our important customers. Of course, I do realize I'm still unpopular. Humans even accuse me of causing winter. But you don't want to hear my troubles? Let's talk about you. Have you thought about where you will spend eternity? I've got a lovely little piece of Elysium available right over here.
Where did your family's ancestors originate? Every family has a history, and this was also true for the Greek gods. Some of the Olympic gods were constantly plotting and scheming, while others competed for the respect of humans. While all the other gods meddled and engaged trouble, the peaceful goddess Hestia kept the home fires burning.
It's all right. Not too many people have heard of me. Please, make yourself comfortable. Perhaps you'd like a little ambrosia. It's my speciality, you know. You look a little thin and pale. Have you been eating right? Well, I don't get out much, like the other gods. I'm really not interested in all their wars and adventures. I didn't even take sides in the Trojan War. My philosophy is, let my brother Zeus throw thunderbolts. Let my nieces and nephews meddle in the affairs of men. I'll find my pleasure in a well-cooked meal and an honoured guest. You see, I am the goddess of the holy hearth. Home. Would you like another helping?
Armed with a fearsome thunderbolt, Zeus ruled the heavens and was king of all the other gods. But still, Zeus was not all-powerful. He had a few weaknesses that usually kept him in trouble with his wife, the goddess Hera.
I am Zeus, mighty god of the sky. Do you mind if I step in here out of the sun for a few moments? This swan disguise is frightfully hot. I've got to work undercover, you see, when Hera's watching. Thanks. Oh, watch the beak. Oh. Well, I suppose you were expecting somebody with a long beard, big muscles, and a thunderbolt. That's what most people expect. Of course, if I appeared in my full Olympian glory, I would fry you right here. But what's the point of that? Not that I haven't had to blast a few people, and gods, over the centuries. It's not easy trying to keep everyone in line. Once, I confess, I became so fed up with the human race that I caused a great flood, wiped them all out. Spared only 2 people. I just don't have time for nonsense. What with my duties as judge, father, lord of the skies. That's why I need a little relaxation from time to time. Speaking of which...
As the goddess of marriage and motherhood, Hera was fully occupied and had a hard time keeping tabs on her husband Zeus, who was always falling in love with beautiful mortal women. Maybe that's why legend said Hera had quite a temper.
I have got such a headache. Life up here on Olympus isn't a bowl of ambrosia, let me tell you. It's been eons since I had a good night's rest. Just look at these bags under my eyes. I try to be a perfect wife and mother, but what do I get in return? A husband who chases every nymph that flits by. I never know where he is or when he's coming back. Don't you think it's just ludicrous the way he sneaks round in all those ridiculous costumes? And you humans are better at remembering our anniversary than he is. Everyone says I'm jealous and mean, but with a husband like Zeus, who can blame me?
The god who most enjoyed hunting was not Zeus or Apollo, but the young goddess Artemis. This goddess was not interested in marriage and children. She spent her time outdoors, hunting under the moon.
When I was a little girl, my father, Zeus, asked me what presents I wanted. He was a little surprised when I told him I didn't care about having a husband or children. I wanted a hunting tunic and a bow and arrows just like Apollo's. I got what I asked for, and now I'm the best hunter there is. But I don't just go around shooting animals. I look after all the newborn creatures of the forest, and I always save a few arrows for humans that anger me. Once a hunter forgot to offer me part of an animal he'd killed. I got so mad that I sent a huge boar to tear him to pieces. So watch what you're doing out there.
The Temple of Artemis began as the dream of King Croesus of Lydia. But 200 years after it was built, a madman burned the monument to the ground. After Alexander the Great rebuilt the temple, it earned a place among the wonders of the ancient world. In ancient times, King Mausolus ruled Caria, a land in southern Turkey. He conquered many lands and built a great capital city. But for such a great warrior, these deeds were not enough. Mausolus also dreamed of building a magnificent tomb in his own honor. Zeus, the king of the gods, lived high on Mount Olympus, but no one dared climb the mountain to worship him. Instead, a huge statue of the god sat enthroned in a sacred temple. More than 20 times taller than a person, the statue of Helios, the sun god, stood guard at the entrance to an ancient city's harbour. Made of gleaming bronze, it must have shone as brightly as the sun itself. This statue left the Greeks so awestruck that they called it the Colossus of Rhodes. You're the captain of a ship tossed on a stormy sea at night. One mistake, and your ship could break apart on the rocks, pitching you and your crew into the water to drown. Suddenly, in the distance, you see a burning light. "2,000 years ago, Greek men met at the local taverna to enjoy some food and a glass of wine. Centuries later, the tavernas are still popular, but now they're open to everyone, not just to men. Greece no longer has great battle fleets, but the country still depends on the sea. Today, Greece has one of the world's largest shipping fleets, carrying cargo and passengers all over the world. Modern Greece is like a time machine, in that it's possible to experience the glory of its ancient culture, which is still alive today. For modern Greeks, showing tourists the foundations of their civilization is an important and profitable business. Telephones, VCRs, and traffic jams have come to the cities of Greece. But outside large towns, many people still live the same way their ancestors did thousands of years ago. One language from the ancient world lives on. Greek, unlike Egyptian, Latin, and other classical languages, is still spoken today. Of course, in 2,000 years, Greek has also changed quite a lot. Imagine having a broken leg set without any anesthetic. For patients in ancient times, having such an injury treated was often just as dangerous and painful as letting it heal naturally. Snakes. You probably think of them as dangerous, even deadly. But snakes are part of a special badge called a caduceus that doctors wear as a sign of their profession. It's an ancient symbol that once honored Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. People all over the world still follow an ancient tradition when they recover from an illness. They often leave tokens of thanks to the gods that they believed healed them. But in ancient Greece, the gods that healed people were also the gods whose magic arrows made people sick. One Greek scientist made a great discovery in his bathtub. One day, when Archimedes sat down in his tub, the water overflowed. "Eureka!" he shouted. He'd discovered the principle of displacement, which explains why ships float. Doctors today take a special oath, promising to help their patients and to do no harm. This is called the Hippocratic Oath, so named after the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, who is considered the father of modern medicine. A half-human beast that eats children? An ancient legend said such a creature lived in a vast maze beneath the palace at Knossos. Every 9 years, King Minos forced Athens to send him 14 children, which he fed to the monster known as the Minotaur.
For many years, the grieving parents of Athens sent their children to a terrible death in the jaws of the Minotaur. This year, when King Minos demanded his tribute, I could no longer stand by. I set sail for Crete with the 14 children. Our ship flew black sails, for no one expected to see us again. But when I arrived at the palace, the gods were on my side. The princess Ariadne fell in love with me and pledged to help me kill the Minotaur. She gave me a sword to slay the beast and a magic ball of thread to guide me back out of the maze. That night, I crept alone through the still, pitch blackness of the maze, trailing the thread behind me. Suddenly, I felt the Minotaur's hot breath on my back. I turned and fought him with all my strength. After a terrible and bloody struggle, I finally killed the huge beast. From that time on, the children of Athens were safe from the Minotaur.
Palaces of the ancient world always glorified the deeds of kings. But no palace was more spectacular than the mansion of King Minos. It was a city in itself, a place of lively entertainment, glorious art, and busy trade. One of the strangest mysteries from Minos is a figure of a woman grasping wriggling snakes in her hands. Was she a priestess of a cult that worshipped snakes? Was she a goddess? No one knows for sure. What was it like to live in a palace in ancient times? The people who called the palace of Knossos home surrounded themselves with spectacular art and entertainment and hundreds of servants. Many cultures have fine acrobats, but gymnastics alone were not enough to impress the Minoans. Their athletes made such sports a little more interesting by leaping over bulls. How do we know so much about a culture that existed 4,000 years ago? Who realized that a pile of old rocks had once been a great palace? Much of what we know today about the Minoans is due to the work of an archaeologist called Sir Arthur Evans. Like the pyramids in Egypt, the Parthenon is one of the most famous monuments surviving from the ancient world. It was severely damaged centuries ago, but this temple, dedicated to the goddess Athena, still stands high above Athens, more than 2,000 years after it was built. Zeus, Poseidon, Artemis. These were some of the gods that the ancient Greeks believed lived high on Mount Olympus. Although each village had its own special gods, only the 12 Olympians were honored throughout Greece. Even today, government buildings and monuments in most countries throughout the world are built in a style that the Greeks perfected 2,500 years ago. Constructing such a building or monument is still a major project. So how did the ancient Greeks create their marvels without modern equipment and tools? Today, most of the ceremonies in ancient Greece seem strange to us. But every 4 years, Greeks gathered from all over the country for a festival that still continues to this day. In fact, it attracts people from all over the world, and you can watch it on TV. The ancient Greeks believed that the gods were involved in every part of human life. During the Trojan War, the gods even helped one side or the other. In fact, Greek gods were always intervening to help those humans they favored or to punish people they hated. If imitation is a great compliment, then the ancient Greeks must be the most admired people who ever lived. Even the mighty Romans copied their designs and style. Today, in cities throughout the world, there are modern buildings that could have been designed by an architect from ancient times. There were hundreds of gods in ancient Greece. A god for rain and a god for healing, a god for metal workers, and another to protect travelers. Some gods were worshipped in just one city-state or tiny village, but everyone in Greece honored the 12 Olympians. Greek temples were more than just places of worship. In ancient times, they were also homes to prophets who, with the help of the gods, revealed the future in mysterious predictions and riddles. Death came early to many people in ancient times. Young men died in battle, young women in childbirth. But the Greeks believed that with a proper funeral, a person's soul could live forever. To the ancient Greeks, 3 gods ruled the universe. Zeus commanded the earth and sky, while Poseidon was god of the sea, and their grim-faced brother, Hades, was king of the underworld, the land of the dead. This is how the Greeks imagined death. A soul stood on the banks of a still black river and watched a ferry slowly approach. For a single coin, the boat would take the soul to the other side, to the kingdom of the dead. How would the kingdom of Hades appear? How would the souls of the dead spend eternity? The answers depended on the kind of life a person had led. The ancient Greeks believed the river Styx was just one of many rivers that led down into the underworld. There were even stories about living people who traveled to Hades using a secret entrance. There is a saying, in relation to our death, you can't take it with you. The ancient Greeks, however, believed you could. Like the Egyptians, they made sure a person was buried with everything they thought the departed soul might need in the afterlife. To the ancient Greeks, Three gods ruled the universe. Zeus commanded the earth and sky, while Poseidon was god of the sea, and their grim-faced brother, Hades, was king of the underworld, the land of the dead. How big is the earth? What is matter made of? How do animals and plants grow? Like each generation of people before them, the Greeks asked these questions, but they were the first to look for and find scientific answers. Following a tradition that started in ancient Athens, the Olympic Games today always begin with the lighting of a torch. Runners carry the flame from Olympia, the site of the first Games more than 2,700 years ago. The ancient Greeks did not have cameras, but nevertheless they did leave us a kind of photograph album. Wall paintings, pictures on vases and other art show us what they looked like, what they ate, and how they lived. Of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, only the Great Pyramids at Giza remain today. The others disappeared centuries ago, and we know of them only from descriptions written down when the monuments were still awesome reminders of great civilizations. Learning to read and write was not enough for some Greek students. They believed that by asking the right questions, they could discover the truth. The eager students found their teachers in the marketplace, in the homes of the wealthy, and later in special schools. You don't have to go to Athens to see what ancient Greek monuments and temples looked like. Visit almost any modern city in Europe or America, and you'll find at least one building that would be perfectly at home on a street in ancient Athens. In Athens and other Greek cities, artists perfected sculpture. They carefully studied anatomy and depicted the human body in graceful new poses. Centuries after they were carved, these great works still seem as if they could leap to life. Tragedy, comedy, drama. These are all descriptions and concepts that originated in ancient Greece, where the traditions of Western theatre were born. The style of drama has changed since ancient times, but when you watch a play today, you're seeing an ancient Greek art live on.
Our happiness depends on wisdom all the way. The gods must have their due. Great words by men of pride bring greater blows upon them. So wisdom comes to the old.
You already know many words or parts of words that came from the Greek language. Every time you say television or astronaut, you're using words that have their roots in ancient Greece. On the Greek island of Thera, archaeologists have unearthed the remains of a mysterious and great civilization. Could these people have been the residents of the legendary lost city of Atlantis? Some experts say yes. A huge golden statue of Poseidon in a temple of gold, silver and ivory was just one of the marvels that Plato tells us could be found among the treasures of Atlantis. Many people still search for Atlantis. From the Mediterranean Sea and the Arctic Circle to islands far off the coasts of Europe and America. They believe that one day they'll find the remains of an island that Plato described as larger than Libya and Asia put together, a great and wonderful empire. A huge golden statue of Poseidon in a temple of gold, silver and ivory was just one of the marvels that Plato tells us could be found among the treasures of Atlantis. Most experts agree that Atlantis never existed, but recent discoveries give us an idea of how the story might have started. Scientists have uncovered ancient cities that once had sophisticated water systems and other signs of careful planning and technological skill. The Trojan War is one of the greatest legends from ancient times, a tale of love, war and revenge. But is it just a story? One man was sure that a huge Greek army really had laid siege to Troy, the home of the Trojan people. He spent his life and fortune on a quest to discover the remains of that ancient city. The Greeks believed that by visiting an oracle, a temple where priestesses spoke for the gods, they could find out what would happen in the future. Visitors always got answers, but it was not easy to understand what they meant. Recovering from an illness, harvesting a good crop, celebrating the birth of a child. To an ancient Greek, all of these events required an offering to the gods. Hanging by a thread, that's a common expression today. But it was much more than a saying to the ancient Greeks. They believed it was literally true, that life itself hung by a thread. The Olympics. Today, this event is the ultimate goal of athletes. But what has become a worldwide international competition began in the ancient city of Olympia for an entirely different purpose: to honor Zeus, the most powerful of the gods. Thunderstorms, flocks of birds, even the guts of a sacrificed animal had special meaning for the Greeks. A wise seer who knew how to interpret these things could foresee future events from such signs. Most people think they would like to know the future, but it's not always wise to find out what lies ahead. An oracle might predict a good harvest, but it could also foretell the day and hour of your death.
I am the most miserable man alive. Once I knew the future and thought I could escape my fate. Now I must live the rest of my days knowing that no one can escape his destiny. When I was young, the oracle at Delphi told me that I would kill my father and marry my mother. Desperate to avoid this terrible fate, I left the people who had raised me and went to another land. One day, in a fit of rage, I killed a man who turned out to be the Theban king. I took his throne and his queen. We lived happily together until an old blind fortune-teller revealed that the oracle's horrible prophecy had come true. The king I had killed and the queen I had married were my real parents.
Wine and cakes were considered sufficient offerings most of the time. But festivals and special occasions called for something more: an animal sacrifice. Pious people brought a goat, a lamb, or a cow to the temple for the priests to sacrifice. Do you know the story of the Trojan War? To many people it sounds too fantastic to be true. But one man believed Homer's story was based on fact, and he spent his life trying to prove it.
Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium? Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss.
I have gazed on the face of Agamemnon, said Heinrich Schliemann, after he discovered a golden death mask at Mycenae. He found so many treasures at the ancient fortress that Mycenae truly deserved to be called the City of Gold. The warlike Mycenaeans were not the first people to dominate the Mediterranean. Many centuries before Agamemnon's army set sail for Troy, another great civilization flourished on the island of Crete and then mysteriously disappeared. Even the gods envied Athens. Legend said that the gods Poseidon and Athena wanted the honor of protecting it. Each offered a precious gift to win the city's favor. Why did the people choose Athena's olive tree over Poseidon's horse? Perhaps because the countryside was better for cultivating olives than for grazing horses. Athenians went to school, but not just to learn skills for good jobs. They believed every citizen, that is, every man, had to participate in the government, and only educated men could decide what was right for the city. The statue honoring Athena has long since disappeared from the Parthenon, but the temple remains, still elegant and graceful, high on the Acropolis. Athenians lived in dangerous times. Threatened by the Persians in the east and the Spartans to the south, Athens was always prepared for war. Its army defended the land borders, while a wooden wall, a huge fleet of fast ships, guarded against attack from the sea. Artists, writers, scientists, and philosophers, they all came to Athens. It seemed that everyone eager to learn had heard Socrates say, "Fields and trees teach me nothing, but the people in a city do." Soon after it became a great city, a revolt threatened to tear Athens apart. The wealthy had enriched themselves, leaving ordinary people to starve. But instead of crushing the uprising, a leader named Solon decided the people were right, and he revolutionized Greek government. Athens seemed to have everything important to a great city: wealth, power, and art of breathtaking beauty. But even Athens could not buy peace and security. To the south lay a restless, envious city-state, home of the fearsome Spartan warriors. The ancient Greeks did not have the sophistication of modern weapons, such as guns or grenades. They were compelled to fight brutal and very bloody hand-to-hand contests, surrounded by the screams of the wounded and the dying. Life in Sparta was no picnic. Starting at the age of 7, Spartan boys commenced training for war, and every male Spartan became a soldier for life. In ancient times, a soldier's clothing was all that stood between him and death. Only rich men could afford armor. But even an animal skin draped over a man's arm could deflect a blow from a sword or tangle a spear in its folds. The Greek navy was one of the finest in the ancient world, vanquishing its enemies with brutal efficiency. In battle, a ship's captain had one objective: to disable the enemy's ships and ram them. For foot soldiers, safety lay in numbers and discipline. In the face of the enemy's arrows, spears, and chariot attacks, only troops who were able to hold their own line could survive and win. Those who broke rank and ran were quickly cut down or captured. Not all the great battles were fought between ranks of soldiers armed with spears and swords. Sometimes the struggle to capture a city was a long wait, a siege. The captain of a Greek warship had to depend on his own cunning and the strength of his rowers' backs. Victory came to the ship that could outmaneuver its opponent and then, in a final burst of speed, ram the enemy vessel broadside. Athens and Sparta were the two most powerful city-states of ancient Greece. One was a centre of art and learning, the other a region of fierce warriors, jealous of Athenian wealth and always ready for war. After a lifetime of harsh treatment, the Spartan soldier was a very tough warrior. Showing neither fury nor fear, he was terrifying in battle. Spartans, even small children, showed strength of will that few people can even imagine today. Hunger, long marches in bad weather, blockades by enemy ships, none of these could break the Spartans' will. In Sparta, the diet of food was normally simple and sparse. But there was a recipe for special occasions. Minced liver, calf's brain, fat, onions, and grain that had been boiled in a goat's stomach. Life was certainly hard for boys in Sparta, but Spartan girls had more freedom than young women in Athens and other parts of Greece. At least they were able to leave their houses. The Greeks won the Trojan War, but their victory was an unhappy one. The Greek commander, Agamemnon, survived the war, only to meet a violent death when he returned home. Some say the Trojan War began when the goddesses Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera commanded Paris, the prince of Troy, to decide which of them was the most beautiful. The prince chose Aphrodite, who had promised in return to give him Helen, the most beautiful mortal woman in the world. The Greek hero Odysseus spent 10 years fighting at Troy and another 10 years returning home. But his adventures seem short compared to the 30 or more years it took Heinrich Schliemann to realize his dream of finding Troy. Legend says that a blind poet called Homer told the story of the Trojan War. Like other poets of his time, Homer traveled around ancient Greece and sang his epic tales from memory. Today, no one knows if Homer really existed, but the stories live on more than 2,000 years later. Swift-footed Achilles was champion of the Greeks, and Hector was the bravest of the Trojan warriors. One knew his destiny was to die in battle, the other was sure the gods would always protect him. But both knew they would meet their fates at a place called Troy. The greatest war story of all time ended not with a great victory on the battlefield, but with a trick. The Greeks set a trap for the Trojans, knowing they couldn't resist what seemed to be a wonderful gift. You don't need a huge wooden horse to get inside Troy today. Anyone can visit the ancient ruins and imagine the great battles that Homer described. But this legendary city still has not given up all its secrets. To the north of Sparta and Athens lay the kingdom of Macedonia. Long torn by civil war and battles with its neighbors, this kingdom hardly seemed to pose any threat to the great city-states. But in a relatively short space of time, a one-eyed king named Philip and his son Alexander changed all that by building Macedonia into a new world power. In ancient Greece, two great city-states existed side by side. Athens, which possessed a powerful navy, and Sparta, which had a large army. For years, these two powers watched each other with suspicion and distrust. Finally, they fought a war that tore the Greek world apart. What are the facts behind the most famous war of the ancient world? And can the details be proved to substantiate the legend of a prince named Paris who loved a princess called Helen, reputedly the most beautiful woman in the world? The burned-out ruins discovered beneath the earth prove that centuries ago, two mighty armies did clash at a place called Troy. What makes an army successful? More men and superior weapons usually win the battle. But with the right general, even a small, poorly equipped army can defeat a much more powerful foe. Across the vast deserts to the east of Greece, a great king created a powerful army and conquered all the lands around him. Lydia, Babylonia, Assyria, and Palestine all fell before the might of Cyrus, the great king of Persia and founder of the Persian Empire. If you're not with us, you're against us. That might have been the motto of the ancient Greeks. Every city-state in Greece was always prepared for war, and when they weren't fighting a foreign enemy like the Persians, the Greeks often fought each other. Outnumbered and facing the fearsome Persian army, the small Greek force at Marathon had just one chance to save their people and their land from almost certain death and destruction. Instead of marching forward in a tight formation, the Greeks made a desperate charge under the swarms of Persian arrows into the heart of the enemy lines. Kings, queens, and generals ruled every country in the ancient world. That is, until the citizens of Athens invented a new form of government. Athens was probably the first place on earth to give ultimate power to its citizens by creating the people's rule. They called it democracy. Learning from the greatest teacher in ancient Greece was nothing like going to school today. This teacher did not have a classroom or even write down his thoughts. When students asked Socrates questions, he never answered them directly. He just looked at them and asked more questions.
False words are not only evil in themselves, but they infect the soul with evil. The unexamined life is not worth living. Poverty is the partner of revolution and crime. Even when laws have been written down, they ought not always to remain unaltered. Poetry is something more philosophical and is worthy of more serious attention than history.
To many ancient peoples, the meaning of a story was more important than whether or not it was true. But it was in ancient Greece that people began to search for the real story of the past, and they called their quest history. Poetry was very popular in ancient Greece, although most people couldn't read. All over the country at banquets and festivals, traveling performers recited spellbinding tales like the Iliad and the Odyssey. Rain and fire, birth and death, the sun and the stars. For most people in ancient times, myths and legends explained these mysteries. But then Greek philosophers began to search for laws to describe the way the world works. Their answers, from atoms to mathematical theorems, are still important to scientists today. You might be surprised at how much we owe to the Greeks. In maths, science, philosophy and art, the ancient Greeks came up with ideas which are still of central importance in these disciplines today. Persia was the prize Alexander wanted to win above all others. Before he fought the Persian king, he was shown the legendary Gordian knot. Whoever could undo the knot, he was told, would rule Asia. Alexander simply cut through it with his sword. What made Alexander so great? How did he learn to command an army? And where did his extraordinary will and ambition come from? No one knows for certain, but his parents were cunning, tough, and had grandiose plans for their son. Alexander had conquered the world by the time he was 30, but he did not live to rule the lands he had captured. The great general who had survived so many wounds suddenly died, not on the battlefield, but on a sickbed. Most generals brought back treasure and prisoners as proof of their victories. Alexander demanded greater tributes to his glory. Whenever he conquered a new land, he founded a city and named it after himself. By the time he died, there were over 70 cities named Alexandria. Legend said that as a boy, Alexander hated to hear of his father's victories. He was afraid Philip would leave nothing for him to capture. But when Alexander took command, he quickly reached far beyond even his father's great conquests, to the very edge of the known world. In ancient times, most people never travelled more than a few miles from their homes. But one man not only visited far-off lands, he conquered them. In just 12 years, Alexander the Great led his army through most of the known world and made it his own. Shoulder to shoulder, spears thrust forward, shields locked in a solid wall, troops marched into battle straight towards the enemy's lines. This was how a battle began, until Alexander tried a daring new tactic. Thick walls could protect a city against most armies, but Alexander's troops brought more than swords with them when they attacked a city. Catapults, battering rams, and siege engines were the weapons they used to crush the enemy's defenses. Beautiful pottery, cryptic writing, and legends of great palaces. For centuries, these were the only clues about an ancient civilization that once flourished on the island of Crete, and then mysteriously disappeared. Long before the rise of Athens, warrior kings ruled a people called the Mycenaeans. These were the Greeks that Homer wrote about in the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War. For nearly 500 years, they ruled the eastern Mediterranean from their hilltop fortresses. Greek civilization almost disappeared with the end of Mycenaean culture. For more than 300 years, the Greeks lived in a dark age, a time when even the art of writing was lost. Today, the Spartans are remembered as fierce warriors, always prepared for battle. But long ago, Sparta was a land of music and art with a culture that rivaled that of Athens. Then the Spartans were shocked into creating one of the most powerful armies in the ancient world. Silver mines, busy trading routes, and steady supplies of essentials like olive oil made Athens the richest and largest city in ancient Greece. One awesome threat loomed over even glorious Athens. To the east, the powerful Persian Empire had assembled a huge army that had marched across Greek colonies in Asia Minor. Now the Persians looked towards the Greek mainland and to Athens itself. Perfection was not just an idea to the Greeks. They tried to achieve it in practice, in their sculpture, vase paintings, and temples that gleamed in the bright sun. The art they created during the classical period still inspires sculptors and architects all over the world today. They stood together against the Persian threat. But even in victory, Sparta and Athens could not trust each other. In the end, the jealousy and suspicion between the two great powers in ancient Greece led to disaster for both. To the Athenians and Spartans, Macedonia was a backward land of shepherds and farmers, people who were not even considered to be real Greeks. But suddenly, everything changed. A one-eyed king named Philip took the Macedonian throne and transformed the army into a weapon of conquest. In just over a decade, one young man did more to change the world than all the kings and philosophers who had come before him. Alexander the Great conquered the known world, and although he died young, his influence endured more than that of most long-reigning kings. The empire that Alexander the Great had created began to break up soon after his death. But his legacy lasted for centuries. Greek became the universal language. Cities he had founded became models of Greek culture. Greek art, science, and philosophy set the standards for scholars throughout the ancient world. Alexander had a plan to unite the whole world under one ruler, one language, and one currency. He planned to give conquered peoples equal rights and allow them to serve in the army. But in the end, his empire broke up almost as soon as it was established. Many countries in the ancient world had big armies, but a good navy could be just as important, and the Greeks built some of the best fleets in the ancient world. In fact, Greek warships became the model for fighting vessels that lasted into Roman times. Waging war isn't the only way to capture foreign lands. Merchants and traders, not soldiers, were the first Greek conquerors. Greek merchants, in search of grain, reached Egypt's shores long before Alexander the Great. But it was Alexander who made Egypt part of the Greek world and home to one of the most magnificent cities of his empire. By the time he was 30, Alexander the Great ruled most of the civilized world. Many experts think he was the greatest commander in history. But it was Alexander's father who built the army that followed the young conqueror to the ends of the earth. By the time of Alexander the Great, Greece ruled the Mediterranean. But it wasn't the only powerful force in the area. In the east loomed the Persian Empire, home of the most feared and powerful army of the ancient world. In ancient Greece, a suntan indicated a person who had to work in the fields. Fashionable men and women wore hats to protect themselves from the sun, and perhaps to protect their hairstyles as well. Getting dressed first thing in the morning might have been confusing in a Greek house. Everyone, men, women and children, wore the same style of clothes. The only difference was in the hemline. Simple garments suited Athenians, but centuries earlier, on the island of Crete, a place famous for the sport of bull leaping, the Minoan people favoured clothing in a more colourful and flamboyant style. The Greeks preferred basic clothes, but that does not mean they neglected their appearance. Hair care and makeup were just as important to the ancient Athenians as they are to fashion-conscious people today. While most people dressed for comfort and convenience, a soldier cared about one thing only. His clothing had to be practical, because it was often all that stood between him and death. Because of extensive variety in fashion today, choosing appropriate clothing can be a complex issue for some. For people in ancient times, however, it was not too difficult, because there was usually only one style available. The only choice involved for most was what colour to wear. Greek women rarely left their homes in ancient times. Their society was dominated by men. Most women had perhaps only one chance each day to meet their friends and to hear of news outside their houses. That was during their trips to fetch water from the town well. In ancient times, everyone worked hard, both men and women. Women may not have been as visible as men, who ran the government and served in the army, but women managed the household, cared for the whole family, and raised a future generation of citizens. In ancient times, clothing, towels, blankets and rugs were items of luxury that only rich families could afford to buy. In most homes, someone, usually the women of the house, made all of these things. On Earth, men controlled the lives of mortal women, but things were different high on Mount Olympus. No one told the goddesses what to do. Women in Sparta did not serve in the army, but they lived rigorous lives. Spartan girls stayed healthy with lots of exercise, and women had to be strong and independent to run the family while their husbands were away in the army. The ancient Greeks would be proud to know that the Olympic Games continue today, but certainly they would be shocked to see women competing in sports that they reserved solely for men. Someone, I tell you, will remember us. We are oppressed by fears of oblivion. These words by Sappho, a poet and a woman in ancient Greece, must have echoed the feelings of many other women who were her contemporaries. Today, fashions change quickly, and people can choose from many styles of clothing. The ancient Greeks did not have many choices, but people still found clever ways to brighten up their attire and look their best. Of all the accomplishments of the ancient Greek civilization, none is more admired than its sculpture. The statues carved in ancient Greece still represent the perfection of the artist's craft. But the sculpture we admire today would look unfinished to the ancient Greeks. They painted their statues in bright, strong colors. The ancient Greeks were master metal workers. Artisans made everything from spear tips and swords to glorious statues that were valued throughout the Mediterranean world. Pottery was one of the most valuable goods the Greeks had to offer. Greek vases and jars came in all shapes and sizes for storing oil, fetching water, and mixing wine. How many olives equaled a large piece of wool? How much wine could you get for a basket of eggs? For many people in ancient Greece, exchanging things, not money, was the only way to do business. High mountains, treacherous roads, thieves and pirates. In the face of such dangers, only brave travelers ventured very far from their homes. Greek merchants traveling through the ancient world left a trail behind them. From North Africa to the Indian border, modern archaeologists have found pots and vessels that were made in Greece. In fact, pottery was Greece's most valuable export. Long before Alexander's armies marched to the far reaches of the ancient world, Greek traders and colonists had already ventured into foreign lands. Pottery was one of the most valuable goods the Greeks had to offer. Greek vases and jars came in all shapes and sizes for storing oil, fetching water, and mixing wine. You've probably heard the old expression, "There's no place like home." Well, in ancient Greece, home was the only place for women. At first glance, the style of most ancient Greek houses did not seem especially interesting, but on closer examination, a few small decorative touches become apparent, such as a funny face made of tile, an animal's head at the end of a rainwater pipe, or a handsome wooden door. Pots are handy for storing and carrying things, but in ancient Greece, a pot was often much more than just a practical container. It could also be a work of art, a history lesson, or even money. Have you ever felt so full after a meal that all you wanted to do was to go and lie down? The ancient Greeks had a good solution to this problem. They ate lying down. Visit a city like Athens today, and you might think that nothing remains of the old way of life, except a few ruined temples. But go to the countryside, and you'll see that some changes are only skin deep. From housework to farm work to mining, most of the hard labor in ancient Greece was done by people who worked like slaves, because they were slaves. Whether they were captured in battle or bought from foreign traders, most slaves worked very hard. Only a few were ever able to buy their freedom. In ancient Greece, everyone, rich and poor, ate a lot of fish, even if the rain didn't come and the crops failed. the sea provided a steady source of food. According to legend, the Greeks named Athens after the goddess Athena because she gave them a great gift, the olive tree. You might not think olives are very valuable, but to the Greeks, olives were food, fuel, and even soap. Today, some people may lie down to rest after a big meal, but in ancient Greece, a banquet started with everyone reclining on couches. However, family members did not eat together. Men ate in one room, while women and children had their dinner in another. Greek wine was so strong that most people mixed it with water. At dinner parties, the host decided how much water to add to the wine. A lot for a pleasant meal, or just a little for a wild celebration. A loaf of bread, a jug of wine. These words from a famous poem could have been spoken by a Greek. Just like wine, bread was an important part of every meal, the main part of a meal for most people. Imagine walking along a dusty, winding mountain road. Up ahead, you hear the clip-clop of hooves and the bleating of sheep. Then, a flock comes round the bend, followed by a boy and a donkey. This is a sight that ancient travellers knew well, and one that can still be seen in many parts of Greece today. What caused rain to fall or to stay away so long that the crops dried up in the fields? For the Greeks, there was only one answer: the gods. Olives for breakfast? To the Greeks, olives were more than garnishment for salads. Olives were eaten with almost every meal. In fact, breakfast often consisted of bread dipped in olive oil. Day in, day out, most people ate the same foods: bread, some olives, maybe some fish. In fact, unless they were rich, most Greeks did not have many options to vary their diet from meal to meal. If farming was so hard, how did the ancient Greeks get most of their food? From the same place they do today, the sea. Ancient vase paintings show Greek fishermen at work. Every day they went out in small boats to catch fish, as well as their favorite food, octopus. The ancient Greeks did not attach the same significance to wine that most people do today. Wine was not reserved for parties or celebrations, but was regarded as a drink for all occasions. Everyone drank wine. It was served with every meal, even breakfast. "I want something special for dinner," a Greek father might have told the local butcher. That looks a nice goat head. I love them roasted with garlic. Or perhaps I'll take that whole pig hanging from the pole. It looks really fresh. Much has changed in Greece over the last 2,000 years, but some traditions like shopping in open-air markets are alive and well. Of course, today, it's not just the men who do the shopping, and there's a lot more you can buy. You might think that olive oil is merely something to cook with, but it was much more useful than that to the ancient Greeks. You probably can't even begin to imagine some of the things they used it for. After a hard day on the road in ancient Greece, travellers could not simply stop at an inn or taverna for a rest or a meal, even if their purses were full of money. Before they could buy anything, they first had to visit the money changers in the marketplace. Given the climate of the country, it is not surprising that the Greeks loved being outdoors. On a hot, sunny day, there were few things more pleasant than a meal and a good debate at the local taverna. But like many other pastimes in ancient Greece, these were pleasures reserved only for men. In addition to the shining legacy of the ancient Greeks in art and philosophy, there were many other ways in which they have directly influenced our modern society. The ancient Greeks have even given us the design of our money. They were the first people to make coins with emblems on both sides. Today, we think of money as being pieces of paper or coins. But in the ancient world, money came in many shapes and guises. The Spartans used iron bars to buy goods. Sometimes even coins did not always look the way you would expect. What was the most popular animal in ancient Greece? A lion? A bear? Well, if coins from that time are any indication, it must have been the owl. Did you know that the word orchestra comes from Greek theatre? It means dancing floor. The Greek word for actor was hypocrite. We still use the word today to mean a person who pretends to be what is not. In ancient Greece, women were seldom allowed to leave their houses, and they probably didn't attend the theatre at all. But there were plenty of famous women in Greek plays. So who played the women's parts? Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes. These men created plays, the most popular form of entertainment in ancient Greece. They wrote great tragedies and witty comedies that poked fun at the government and customs of the time.
My heart is steel, well you know. Praise me, blame me, as you choose, it's all one. Here is Agamemnon, my husband, made a corpse by this right hand, a masterpiece of justice. Done is done.
Today, ticket stubs or a program make nice souvenirs of a visit to the theatre. But in ancient Greece, the audience often brought home miniature statues of the characters. Oedipus the king, Agamemnon, Antigone. These are some of the ancient Greek dramas still performed in theatres today. Because modern Greeks carry on the traditions, a few lucky audiences can even see these plays in the same theatres where they were first performed more than 2,000 years ago. Childhood came to a sudden and abrupt end everywhere in ancient times. But in Sparta, children grew up even earlier. By the age of 7, boys and girls began training to prepare themselves for life in the land of warriors. Some things never change. Rich or poor, every child needs essentials, like food, a bed, blankets, and toys. Not to mention the object in the illustration, an ancient Greek chamber pot. Reading, writing, and arithmetic was what ancient Greek children learned in school. But every student also had to memorize long passages from the Iliad, an epic poem by Homer. And to make sure their children studied hard, parents often had a slave accompany them to school. Like people the world over, ancient Greek parents celebrated the birth of a child and welcomed it into the family, but only after it had passed a crucial test. The fateful decision was left entirely to the father. He could accept the child or reject it and demand that it be left to die. In ancient times, war never seemed to cease. Sometimes foreign armies attacked, like those of the fearsome Persian Empire, and sometimes the city-states took up arms against one another. All over ancient Greece, every citizen learned to fight. Wagons, spinning tops, dolls, and model soldiers were favorite toys in ancient Greece. But at the age of 13, the days of toys and games ended. Children then dedicated their playthings to the god Apollo and prepared themselves for adulthood. Ancient Greek letters may seem a little strange, but if we look carefully, we can see many similarities to the letters in modern languages. In fact, the word alphabet comes from the names of the first two letters in the Greek language, alpha and beta. For day-to-day writing, the Greeks used wax tablets that were easy to erase and reuse. But for more important documents, however, papyrus was the favored stationery. Most people have probably heard the expression, "It's all Greek to me," which interpreted means, "I don't understand that at all." But every day, we actually use Greek words. Each time we say history, democracy, or drama, we're using a word derived directly from ancient Greek.
Atlas, atlas. Orchestra, orchestra. Orchestra.
Many ancient civilizations remain mysterious because they never developed writing, or because no one today can read their languages. But the ideas and discoveries from ancient Greece live on because they were written down and in a language we can understand. Today we write with all kinds of tools: pencil and paper, chalk and blackboard, even computers. It was not always that easy to put things down in words, however. Paper and ink were rare, too valuable to waste. So how did people learn to write? Modern dolls come in all shapes, sizes and colors. They talk, they cry, and some even wet their nappies. Dolls in ancient Greece were not as sophisticated, but no doubt their owners loved them just as much. Not everyone can be a general commanding troops in the field, nor would everyone want to be. But anyone can play a board game like backgammon, draughts, or chess. More than 2,000 years ago, the Greeks played similar games of strategy. How many instruments are needed to play a Greek dancing song? Try flutes, brass cymbals and lyres for a start, with an optional drum for good measure. Children always liked toys that spin and whirl, and in ancient Greece they were no different. Tops, yo-yos, marbles, and many other toys familiar today were also available for children's enjoyment more than 2,000 years ago. More than 1,500 years separated the time of the Minoans from that of Alexander the Great. During these centuries, many things changed. The language, the culture, even the gods. And arts and crafts, including pottery, also changed along with everything else. Drinking wine in Greece was not as simple as you might think. At a Greek dinner party, there could be 3 different vessels just for wine. One in which to mix it with water, another to pour the wine, and a third to drink from. The Greeks had a pot for every purpose, and even the most simple vessel was often decorated with a scene from history or mythology. The Greeks saw no reason why practical objects should not be beautiful as well.
The ancient Athenians created some of the finest pottery the world has ever seen. To ancient craftsmen, these clay forms were more than just plates and water jugs. They were like canvases for painting. On such everyday objects, the artists told legends of warriors and gods. But painting on pots is different from painting on canvas. On pottery, the colour comes from glazes, watered-down clay. The Athenians had some of the finest clay in the Mediterranean. When fired, it turned brick red, but they had only one colour of glaze, black. Still, with just this simple combination of black and red, they created great works of art. Artisans decorated pottery in several stages. First, they painted a thin coating of watered-down clay over the whole pot to prepare the surface. Then they used a thicker glaze to paint the figures and designs. When fired in an airtight environment, the iron oxide in the clay turned black, but when air was admitted, the clay reverted to a lighter colour. The parts painted with a thicker solution lightened more slowly than the rest of the pot. After the pot cooled, artists scratched or painted on additional details. They often added white and occasionally a little purple to their designs. This vase was created in the black figure style. The figures were painted with thick clay. The red colour of the clay was allowed to come through in the background. Later, artists reversed the black figure style. They painted most of the pot with the thick clay solution, but leaving the figures in red. Only fine details of the figure were painted in black. This is called the red figure style. If you would like to try to copy the techniques that the Greeks used to decorate vases, all you need is a sheet of red paper and a black marker. To draw in the black figure style, outline a figure. Then fill it in with black. Leave red lines showing within the black areas to add detail to the drawing. To draw in the red figure style, outline a figure in black, and then fill in the background, leaving the figure red. Then add fine details in black. The Greeks took great care in finishing their work, paying attention to the balance of their designs by adding decorative patterns around the body and neck of the vase. The pottery and vases of the ancient Greek craftsmen came in many shapes and sizes. Their decorations tell us a lot about life in their world, but more importantly, they tell us a lot about how the Greeks saw the world and the beauty they found in ordinary pitchers and plates.
One picture is worth more than 10,000 words. This ancient Chinese proverb is certainly true for archaeologists. The pictures preserved on ancient vases are often our only clues about what life was like in ancient times.
Everyone knows that I, Achilles, am the greatest soldier in the Greek army. But our so-called commander, Agamemnon, still thought he could just take one of my prisoners for himself. Who does he think he is? Zeus? I refused to fight any more after that, until the Trojan warrior Hector killed my best friend. He'd borrowed my armour, hoping to frighten the Trojans by pretending to be me. But Hector cut him down. Furious, I charged back into battle, hacking my way through the Trojan lines until I found Hector. He fought bravely, but he didn't have a chance against a warrior like me. To revenge my friend's death, I dragged Hector's body around the city 3 times, so that everyone inside would know what happens to those who earn the wrath of Achilles.
Which of these jars holds milk? Which holds wine or olive oil? Anyone in ancient Greece could tell immediately. Each type of jar held a certain food or item, just as milk and wine bottles are different today. Today, there are two Olympics, the Summer and the Winter Games. It takes 2 weeks for the athletes to compete in hundreds of events. But the first Olympic competition lasted only 1 day and included just a single foot race. You probably know the names of many Olympic heroes, but can you guess who set the first Olympic record? He was a man named Coroebus, who crossed the finish line in the year 776 BC. The Olympics honored Zeus, the most powerful god of the ancient Greek religion. But pleasing Zeus was just one of the rewards of winning an Olympic event. Champions became celebrities in their hometowns, had their choice of wives, and often were exempted from having to pay taxes. For more than 1,000 years, the ancient Greeks held athletic contests in Olympia. Then, following the Roman conquest of Greece, a Roman emperor stopped the games. Another 1,500 years passed before the first modern Olympics were held in Athens. Over the centuries, the Olympic Games have grown bigger and bigger. Once athletes competed in only a few sports, but now the Games consist of everything from foot races to tennis. Captured in war, trained in brutal schools, then thrust into the arena to win or die. For prisoners of war, slaves, and even some volunteers, that was the life of a gladiator. Gladiator fights were not always just for entertainment. In fact, the duels to the death themselves began as part of ancient funeral ceremonies to honor Rome's important citizens. A day of death in the Colosseum began with exotic animals hunted down to the delight of the spectators. But that slaughter was just the beginning. By afternoon, the crowd grew restless, eager for the main event, the gladiator fights. Elephants, hippos, lions, tigers, bears. You could see them all at a really spectacular show in the Colosseum. But they weren't there to do tricks. Like the gladiators, these animals were forced into the ring to fight and die. Even bloody gladiator fights became boring eventually. To keep the crowds entertained, the organizers of the amphitheater had to think of ever more spectacular events. One audience rushed into the Colosseum to find the arena flooded, ready for a truly incredible show. What if games like football or soccer were played to the death? Well, in ancient Rome, some sports didn't have winners and losers, only survivors. And the contestants of the arena weren't athletes. They were forced to fight for their lives. It had all the comforts of home, perhaps more. A canvas cover blocked the sun. Cool mists of scented water refreshed the spectators. Vendors sold snacks and wine while bands played. But for those that the crowds came to see, the Colosseum was a ghastly place of death. The last gladiators died about 1,500 years ago, but crowds still flocked to the Colosseum the most familiar symbol of imperial Rome. Even in ruins, the huge arena shows off the building skills of the ancient Romans and reminds us of their bloody past. Rome no longer rules the world, but as the capital of Italy, it is still a center of art, history and culture. The crowds who visit its imposing ruins prove that for tourists, historians and art lovers, many roads still lead to Rome. Once the capital of the world's greatest empire, today Rome is home to the world's smallest independent state. Set in the heart of Rome is Vatican City, the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. Today, Istanbul is the capital of Turkey and a center of the Muslim world. But for more than 1,000 years, this city was the capital of the Roman Empire in the East and the center of the Orthodox Christian Church. Then it was called Constantinople. In the days of imperial Rome, the Forum was a magnificent place, ringed with gleaming temples, columns, shops, and government buildings made of marble and decorated with gold. But as the empire declined, so did the Forum. In fact, it started to disappear literally piece by piece. Today, Rome is a living art gallery, home to many treasures from ancient times, and more recent masterpieces from the Renaissance. Everywhere, you find works inspired by the artists of classical Greece and Rome, and the masters who followed them.
Today, ruined amphitheatres, derelict temples, and ancient viaducts dot the countryside throughout Italy. These picturesque reminders of a glorious past fascinate tourists, but to modern Italians, they're just part of the everyday scenery.
Many emperors were worshipped as gods after they died, but some leaders were not too eager to receive the honor. As he lay dying, the Emperor Vespasian told his family, "I think I'm becoming a god."
Sacrifices and offerings. To the ancient Romans, that was what most religion was about. They hoped to please the gods with gifts of birds, sheep, cattle, and wine. In exchange, they hoped the gods would bring them and the empire good health and prosperity. Today, the temples of Rome are ruins, but in ancient times, some were mansions for the gods, huge safes for the empire's treasure, or stages for splendid ceremonies to honor the immortal gods. A chicken or goose would do as a sacrifice at an ordinary ceremony, but really important occasions called for a bigger offering to the gods. A pig, a goat, even a whole herd of cows. The empire had millions of priests. In fact, every father was his own family's religious leader, and he directed the most important sacred ceremonies, the daily offerings to the gods of the home and hearth. Flocks of birds, clouds, lightning. To a Roman, such signs could foretell the future. But omens also appeared in the night sky. Many emperors believed the movements of heavenly bodies could reveal everything, the outcome of a great battle, even who was plotting against them.
Betting on the horses was as popular in ancient Rome as it is today. The races, however, were not always fair. Sometimes owners bribed the drivers of other teams to lose a race deliberately, or drugged fast horses to slow them down. Fast horses, a light, swift chariot, and a good grip on the reins, and a sense of balance were not always enough to win at the Circus Maximus. A champion driver had to be just as ruthless as he was skillful. Originally, the Circus Maximus was more than a track for chariot races. Before the Colosseum was built, it was the venue in Rome for athletic games, animal fights, and other entertainments. To impress the crowds, the Romans even staged battles between ships mounted on wheels. Today, it is the most famous symbol of the empire. Monumental in size, practical in design, and efficient in execution, the Colosseum was one of ancient Rome's greatest achievements. The Romans might have adapted Greek designs for many temples, but the Pantheon is a Roman building. The Greeks never could have built such a soaring dome because they did not have one essential ingredient: concrete. Rome's roads still cross the Alps, tunnel through hills, and run straight across the countryside all over Europe. But 2,000 years after they were laid down, the roads remain a riddle. Did the empire build the roads, or did the roads build an empire? The Romans did not try to invent everything themselves. They happily borrowed much of what they saw on their travels, including gods, even the style of temples dedicated to them. But the Romans didn't just make copies. They always added touches of their own. Rome's roads were its veins and arteries, but the arch was the empire's backbone. Graceful as it was for ornamental monuments, the arch did much more important work, from supplying the empire's cities with water to bridging its great rivers. Romans liked plays that were loud and raucous, which prompted some modification of the more serious Greek theatre designs. Thus a Roman theatre held more people, had a better stage for action, and had many exits for the crowd if a riot broke out. Look up into the night sky, and it's likely you'll see a symbol of an ancient Roman god. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Most of the planets in our solar system are named after ancient Roman deities. Soaring columns, a lofty dome, and marble walls mark one of the glories of ancient architecture, the Pantheon. Dedicated to all the gods, this temple still stands today, a spectacular symbol of ancient Rome. Imagine how different life would be without something as simple as the wheel or the zero. Fortunately for motorists and mathematicians everywhere, ancient peoples invented these things long ago. In fact, the ancient world was responsible for many discoveries that we take for granted today. What do the French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese and Romanian languages have in common? They're all based on Latin, the language of the ancient Romans. In fact, all of these languages are called Romance languages because their roots are in Rome.
Elephantus, elephant. Applaudo, applaud. Elephantus, elephant. Applaudo, applaud.
The ancient Romans were good at many things, but keeping a calendar does not appear to have been one of them. By the time Julius Caesar took over government, the Roman calendar had winter occurring in the autumn and summer in the spring. The Romans perfected the art of the arch. They used their graceful arches everywhere, even to make triumphal gates for victorious emperors to march through. But the practical Romans saved much of their best work for bridges, aqueducts, and arenas, projects that made the empire strong. Rome's future was not in the hands of its emperors or armies. The city's fate was believed to depend on 6 young women known as the Vestal Virgins. According to ancient legend, if the sacred flame they tended ever went out, Rome was doomed. The Romans admired much from ancient Greece. They built temples all over the empire, like the shrines Greeks had built to honor their gods. But the Romans didn't just use basic Greek design for their temples, they adopted the gods also. Order, duty, tradition. To the Romans, these were not just words, they were sacred ideals. Long after most people stopped believing in the old gods, Roman leaders carried on with old ceremonies and festivals to remind the people of their duty and allegiance.
Zeus and Jupiter, Ares and Mars, Poseidon and Neptune. Do you know which of these mighty gods are Greek and which are Roman? Sometimes it's hard to tell, because the Romans changed many of their old gods to make them more like Greek deities.
They met in secret temples, built like caves. Whipped into a frenzy by music and chanting, the faithful danced wildly, performed secret rites, even bathed in blood, all to understand the ancient mysteries of the East, and perhaps to earn eternal life. Worship your gods as you will, but make the official sacrifices, or become sacrifices yourself. Many emperors issued such orders to the Jews and Christians, but often those orders were ignored with terrible consequences. Eat your vegetables, they're good for you. We hear that all the time. To the Romans, however, herbs and other plants were more than just healthy foods. They were medicines. Even mustard was thought to cure dozens of illnesses. If you're worried by a visit to a doctor or dentist today, think what it was like for an ancient Roman. Then a doctor's tools looked as deadly as a gladiator's weapons, and for many patients they probably were. Seal's stomach? Gladiator's blood? No, these weren't ingredients in an exotic Roman recipe. They were home remedies. Of course, they might have been better than some of the doctor's medicines, like snake parts mixed with herbs. For most Romans, the best cure was a good night's rest at the temple of Aesculapius. Like the Greeks, Romans believed this god of healing could cure a person who left offerings and spent the night in the temple. The Romans believed that the gods could cure people of their ailments if they showed proper respect and made pleasing offerings. For centuries, the sick and weak made long journeys in search of a cure at a temple of Aesculapius.
"Those who are about to die salute you," shouted gladiators as they faced the emperor and prepared to fight. For these prisoners of war and slaves, the games they played offered a chance to live another day, or more often, to die a spectacular death.
An ordinary tomb was not considered good enough for a wealthy Roman. Rich families built magnificent tombs along major roads. One successful builder even made his tomb in the shape of a bakery. Maybe he was hoping someday to rise from the dead. Ordinary people did not have elaborate tombs, and few of their graves have survived for archaeologists to study. But in a place called Pompeii, more than 2,000 ordinary citizens lay buried beneath layers of ash and mud. For archaeologists, these graves are priceless treasures. The Romans didn't take good care of the bodies of the dead, at least compared to the Egyptians. When someone important died, the family washed and dressed the dead person's body and then left it on display for mourners to visit, sometimes for a week. Maybe that's why the corpse was covered with fragrant flowers and wreaths. Even today, the tombs of many Romans are plainly visible along some of the empire's ancient roads. However, to explore the tombs of the city's early Christians, you have to go underground, into a maze of dark, cramped tunnels that once held the bones of martyrs and saints. For the citizens of two ancient Roman towns, death came suddenly on a sunny summer afternoon. In just minutes, hot ash and poisonous gas trapped thousands of people huddled in their homes and fleeing in terror through the streets.
Poets, not priests, told the Romans what happened after people died. The stories of Homer and Virgil described a paradise called Elysium for those who had lived good lives. For the wicked, a gloomy eternity awaited in the deepest, darkest part of the underworld, a place called Tartarus. It was a lovely view. A mountain loomed high on one side, the sea glistened on the other. There was always something going on at the theatres or the arena, and after a show you could find plenty of hosts who knew how to throw a party. For a Roman tired of Rome, Pompeii was a great escape. Today, it looks like an abandoned movie set with some props still in place, as if waiting for the actors to return. But once, this was a real town, with crowded streets and busy shops that still seem eerily alive. Someone even left loaves of bread in the baker's oven. When they dug through the ash that buried Pompeii, archaeologists hoped they'd find walls, pottery, art, all the bits and pieces they usually dig up at ruins of an ancient town. But they didn't expect to find people frozen in time. Life wasn't bad in Pompeii, not bad at all. You can see for yourself. Just visit the townhouses and explore the lavish private baths, elegant courtyards, and beautifully decorated dining rooms. In fact, with a new roof and some furniture, some houses would be almost ready to live in again. It's not hard to imagine what happened in Pompeii 2,000 years ago. Just watch the news on TV. Volcanoes like Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines still erupt and bury towns in mud and ash. Even Mount Vesuvius itself still rumbles and steams, and someday it may bury Pompeii again. As we started to escape, darkness fell. Not the sort that is moonless and cloudy, but the kind of dark when a lamp has been extinguished in a closed room. You could hear the wailing of women, the cries of babies, and the shouts of men. Some were looking for their parents, others their children, and others their wives. They were trying to identify one another by sounds of their voices. Some lamented their own fate or the fate of their loved ones, and some prayed for death. Many held their hands up to the gods, but more believed that there were no longer any gods, and that this was an eternal and final darkness for the world. It's a little overcooked,
well, carbonized actually. But the food left on the tables and in kitchens in Pompeii still looks almost good enough to eat. In fact, you can tell exactly what was on the menu when Mount Vesuvius interrupted an afternoon meal nearly 2,000 years ago. What did Pompeii really look like in ancient times? Well, the people who lived there literally drew us a picture. In luxurious homes, the walls are covered with colourful mosaics and frescoes, portraits, landscapes, and scenes from everyday life. The citizens of Pompeii are the most famous victims of Mount Vesuvius, but they were not the only ones who died in the catastrophe. Just a few miles away, the town of Herculaneum was also buried by ash from the erupting volcano. For the citizens of Pompeii, a sunny August day 2,000 years ago was just another summer afternoon. All around the city, people were going about their business when a roar from the nearby mountain interrupted them. It was the beginning of the end for Pompeii. There was no peace for the Roman legions. While merchants traded and artisans perfected their crafts, troops expanded and guarded the empire's borders and crushed those who resisted imperial rule. The spear and sword, not the ship, were Rome's favorite weapons. So when the Romans put to sea, they tried to use ships as troop carriers and force the enemy to fight on their terms in bloody hand-to-hand combat with the ships as the killing fields. Rome offered its provinces a simple choice. Follow our orders, pay your taxes, and you will live in peace. But disobey or withhold tribute, and you will suffer. And in province after province, Rome proved that this was no bluff or idle threat. Today, it's just a line across the landscape. But to tribes who lived north of Hadrian's Wall, the blank stones that suddenly appeared across the landscape were an unmistakable message: do not enter. The Roman army was a war machine. Where it needed to march, it built a road. To cross a river, it made a bridge. Blocked by walls, it raised ramps and swarmed over them. No distance was too great, no climate too harsh, no enemy too strong for the legions to conquer. No one really survived a Roman attack. Sometimes the legions slaughtered every living thing in a captured city, men, women, children, even animals. But a merciful commander ordered captives to be dragged away for the slave trade, so they could work themselves to death serving the empire. Sworn enemies, Rome and Carthage, battled for control of the Mediterranean world for more than 100 years. Carthage had a brilliant general named Hannibal, and a daring plan. Rome, ill-equipped and threatened on several fronts, had little more than its will to survive. Early Roman warships were very similar to Greek triremes. Roman boats depended on the strength of their rowers to propel them through the water. But unlike Greek sailors, Roman oarsmen weren't fighting for their country. They were slaves in chains. For 100 years, the Carthaginians, as Hannibal threatened, harassed and attacked Roman territory. Finally, Rome's patience snapped. At the end of all his speeches, the senator Cato shouted, "Carthage must be destroyed!" Egypt was one of Rome's most valuable provinces. It fed the empire. But the Romans took more than grain from the ancient land of the pharaohs. Egyptian art, culture, and even age-old gods also found their way to Rome. The Romans loved almost everything about the Greeks. They admired and adapted Greek art, architecture, and philosophy. In fact, the Romans even changed many of their own gods to be more like the deities worshipped in ancient Athens. Many modern roads in Europe still follow the routes laid down by ancient Roman engineers. In fact, Roman roads and bridges were so well built that some of them are still in use today. At a place called Masada, the Roman will met the faith of zealots. A lightly armed band of Jewish believers held out for 6 months against a determined army equipped with fearsome machines and unlimited supplies. But with their inevitable victory, the legions finally subdued the Holy Land. Of all the territories in the Roman Empire, Egypt was perhaps the most important. Without Egyptian grain, there could be no Roman bread. And when the Republic collapsed into civil war after the death of Julius Caesar, Egypt and its Queen Cleopatra became more important than ever. Rome wasn't the only important city in the empire. Far to the east, Ephesus was also a center of trade, imperial government, and culture. People flocked to its magnificent temple honoring Artemis, its spectacular theater, crowded marketplace, and bustling harbor. Emperors ruled Rome like kings, but no matter how much power they had, tradition said that emperors still had to act like men elected to serve the empire, and not like monarchs. Today, someone might remark figuratively that clothes are beautiful enough to die for. Well, that was literally true in ancient Rome. No one dared to dress more elegantly than the emperor. In fact, it was treason to wear clothes of a certain color. Absolute power. All emperors possessed it, but some were possessed by it. Like a drug, it twisted their minds. Men who began as good rulers often grew paranoid and murdered their own mothers, wives, brothers, and friends. But even with such blood on their hands, some emperors still thought of themselves as gods. He stuttered, twitched, and limped. No one took Claudius seriously. But omens predicted that one day this strange little boy would rule the Roman Empire. Not all emperors were evil or mad. A few men ruled wisely and even rescued the empire from destruction. They brought peace to the entire Mediterranean world, commissioned great works of art, and established laws that are still used today. A handful of old coins. Today, that's how we remember many emperors. Their statues and temples have fallen into ruin, but many of the coins bearing their images and commemorating their accomplishments have survived. From the time of Augustus on, when an emperor died, the Senate declared him a god. Of course, for some, that tribute came too soon. As he lay dying, the Emperor Vespasian said, "I think I'm becoming a god." Legend says while Julius Caesar ruled Rome, A palm tree put out a new branch that swiftly grew to overshadow the entire tree. To Caesar, this omen meant that his adopted son Octavian would become the most powerful Roman leader, greater than even Caesar himself. Julius Caesar was never actually a Roman emperor, but he ran the republic with absolute authority. From the Senate, Caesar demanded and was given the title Dictator for life. He then changed forever how Rome was ruled. Today, experts may refer to the third Roman emperor by his proper name, Gaius. But to most people, this insane, vicious and murderous ruler is best known by his childhood nickname, Caligula, which meant little boots. Nero was not very good at being bad. He tried 5 times to kill his own mother before soldiers finally finished the job. Eventually, however, even the clumsy Nero made himself as hated and feared as any other murderous ruler of the empire. He stuttered and limped, and he didn't want to become emperor. But the imperial guards needed a new ruler immediately after they killed Caligula. They found Claudius hiding in terror behind some curtains in the palace, and quickly proclaimed him the new ruler of Rome. A bloody struggle followed Nero's death. In just 1 year, 4 men fought for and in turn held the title of emperor. 3 of them took power and then quickly fell, victims of their own soldiers or of a rival army. Only the 4th, Vespasian, survived. The people of Rome proclaimed Titus the delight of mankind. He gave them lavish gifts, built new public baths, and finished what became the most popular building in all of Rome, the Colosseum. One of the greatest emperors was not born a Roman. Trajan, the adopted son of the Emperor Nerva, came from Spain. Under this simple and unassuming man, the Roman Empire reached its greatest size. More a poet than a soldier, Hadrian ordered the complete restoration of the beautiful Pantheon in Rome, and promoted literature and the arts. In fact, he so loved Greece that he probably spoke better Greek than Latin. The Pax Romana, which was the peace enjoyed by the Roman Empire since the rule of Tiberius, was shattered during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. This great thinker and writer tried desperately to hold the empire together against barbarian attacks. At the end of the 2nd century, Rome was in chaos. A general named Septimius Severus marched to the city and restored order. But like so many emperors before and after him, Severus proved better at taking power than using it wisely. Like a city shaken by an earthquake, the Roman Empire crumbled during the 3rd century. Rival armies appointed emperors and then murdered the very men they had chosen. The few emperors who died from the plague, rather than by the sword, must have thought themselves lucky. Legend says that before the decisive battle to reunite the empire, Constantine had a vision that he would win if he fought under the sign of the cross in the sky. He ordered his soldiers to paint the symbol of Christ on their shields, and the next day he defeated the enemy forces. The empire in the West died slowly and painfully. At the end, the last emperor of the West ruled from a small town named Ravenna, because Rome was no longer safe for Romans. For centuries, Rome was the greatest military power on earth. But from the time of the early Republic to the end of the empire, many tribes in Europe, Africa, and the East attacked and harassed the Roman frontiers. Did you know that the Romans invented the sports arena? Were you aware that the White House in Washington, D.C. and the National Gallery in London are buildings based on Roman designs? You'd be surprised at how much of ancient Rome is still alive today, even far from Rome itself. Barbarian attacks, civil wars, riots in the streets. Rome had faced such dangers before. But now, even its once mighty army fought not to defend Rome, but for whoever paid the best price. Even emperors, once the most powerful men in the ancient world, lived only as long as they kept their soldiers happy. By the 4th century AD, the empire was not really one empire anymore. Diocletian had divided it in two, and Rome had already abandoned much territory to the barbarians. Even when Constantine briefly reunited East and West, the empire was a different world. It had become a Christian state. German tribes swept west across the English Channel into Britain. Northern people pushed south into Spain, then across to North Africa, defying Rome's weakened armies and extorting peace from the emperor himself. Of all the barbarian tribes attacking the empire, the Huns were the most deadly. Even the other barbarians were afraid of them. Armed with sabers, lances, and arrows, these nomadic warriors on horseback were the terror of the West. Barbarian tribes usually fought to claim new land for farming or to win treasure. The Huns seemed to fight just for the fun of it. Armed with sharp sabers and shooting arrows or wielding lances from horseback, the Huns terrorized everyone in their path. One emperor finally drew a line at the empire's borders, as if daring the barbarians to cross. From northern Britain and across Europe, Hadrian built walls and forts that showed the empire's might, secured its territory, and established new outposts of civilization among the barbarians. Barbarian warriors weren't as well equipped as Roman legionnaires, and their troops were not as disciplined. But from the beginning of the empire, these fierce warriors proved time and time again that they could humiliate Rome's armies. The so-called barbarians did destroy Rome, but in a way they were also responsible for its salvation. For centuries after the Western Empire declined, Christian monks from Celtic, Frankish and other tribes preserved the language, history and culture of ancient Rome. Bar, bar, bar. To the Greeks and Romans, that's what barbarians sounded like when they talked. They thought anyone who didn't speak Greek or Latin was uncivilized. But the Romans fatally underestimated the Celts, Vandals, Franks, and other rough tribes of Europe. Nothing stopped the barbarians from attacking Roman territory, not even the sea. As the Roman Empire crumbled from within, barbarian tribes advanced on the empire from every frontier, slowly squeezing Rome in a death grip. "20 years on the move, daily drills, harsh discipline, endless labor building camps, roads, bridges, aqueducts, and forts. And then there was the fighting. "Give me back my legions," cried Augustus when he learned that barbarians had wiped out 3 of his mighty legions in a dark German forest. He had lost about 18,000 men, and the noble silver eagles carried by the Aquilifer. Sometimes it's not the weapons themselves that are most important, it's how they're used. And like a fine craftsman sharpening a soldier's sword, Roman generals carefully changed the way they used their most important weapons, the legionaries. A Roman soldier met his enemy face to face. To kill, he had to get close, within an arm's length or less. Survival depended on skill, strength, and armor that deflected the enemy's blows. No troops in ancient times were better protected than Roman legionaries. Whether it was for close combat or long-range terror attacks, the Roman army always had the appropriate weapon. Where spears and swords were not adequate, the legions would build new weapons on the spot, even huge siege engines to smash an enemy's fortresses. For poor Roman farmers and peasants in far-off provinces, the Roman army offered steady pay and a chance to learn useful construction skills, if they survived the fighting. In return, Rome demanded absolute loyalty and cruelly punished those who broke the rules. No one really knows when Rome was founded, but the proud Romans didn't think they were the offspring of simple farmers. They believed that the founder of their city was the son of the war god Mars, and that they were descendants of Aeneas, a Trojan warrior who had escaped as Troy burned. Disaster struck Rome a little more than a century after the city was established. Gauls from northern Europe swept down, massacred the senators, and destroyed most of the city. But they quickly rebuilt their city and began a march of conquest of their own. With the defeat of Carthage, Rome reigned supreme in the ancient world. But what centuries of attacks by foreign armies had failed to accomplish, Rome's own leaders managed in just 100 years, the destruction of the Republic. Legend says that Nero, the last emperor to claim a direct relationship to Caesar, played a lyre while Rome burned. But Nero wasn't really that crazy then. He just sang a song about the fall of Troy and planned to build a great new city from the ashes of Rome. In AD 62, an earthquake shook Pompeii, killing hundreds of people and damaging the city. But even that shock did not prepare the citizens for the disaster that came 17 years later, a catastrophe that buried the town and sealed more than 2,000 people in a mass tomb. As the 1st century AD opened, Rome ruled more territory than any empire had claimed since the time of Alexander the Great. Just 100 years later, the legions had surpassed even Alexander's conquests, and Rome ruled the richest and mightiest empire the world had ever seen. Perhaps the most cultured emperor, Marcus Aurelius, wanted to spend his time reading Greek and writing philosophy. Instead, all along the empire's frontiers, he had to fight to keep the barbarians at bay. Walls, forts and huge armies. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, Rome threw everything it had into the defense of the empire. But on every border, barbarians had grown bolder. Franks and Gauls, Vandals and Visigoths pushed their way into an empire weakened by civil wars and foolish leaders. The empire, so mighty only a century earlier, almost collapsed in the 3rd century AD. Evil and corrupt emperors, barbarian attacks and rebellious armies brought chaos both to the countryside and Rome. Today he's remembered as the emperor who made Christianity the official religion of the empire. But Constantine did not become a Christian until he lay dying, and some people think he wanted to be revered as a god himself. Christianity was an underground religion for more than 300 years. The catacombs wound around Rome like subterranean streets. Here the faithful worshipped their God, buried their dead, and slowly undermined the ancient Roman beliefs. Little Augustus was what people called the last ruler of the empire in the West. In fact, he was just a boy. But this Romulus wasn't raised by a wolf or destined to lead an army. He was merely a puppet who ruled an empty empire at the command of his father. For a brief time, the empire in the West glimmered again under a great leader, Justinian. Already emperor of the East, Justinian reclaimed Italy, North Africa and Spain from the barbarians. But within 100 years, the old Western Empire had slipped away again, never to be restored. When Carthage was literally wiped off the map, Rome seemed to have destroyed its last enemy. But the end of the Punic Wars brought only a temporary rest. In less than 100 years, an even more dangerous conflict set Roman against Roman. Rome almost fell before it even became an empire. Its archenemy, Carthage, had vowed to crush Rome. For more than 100 years, Carthage and Rome fought for control of the Mediterranean. No one knows the true story of how Rome began. Early Romans visited and were visited by people from all over the ancient Mediterranean world. And Roman buildings, art, clothing and customs prove that a little piece of each culture found its way into what finally became the Roman Empire. Caesar was dead, and Rome suddenly needed a new leader. But no one dared take Caesar's place, while ambitious generals and their huge armies threatened to take control. Eventually, an uneasy alliance of 3 men replaced Caesar's one-man dictatorship, but only for a while. Emperors and armies, gladiator fights and chariot races. These are the stories that come to mind for many of us when we think of ancient Rome. But for the Romans, the legend of their great city started with a wolf and 2 little boys. The most important treasure brought to Rome from its vast empire was not glittering jewels or shining silver. This precious cargo came from a narrow strip of land along Egypt's great river Nile. It was grain to feed the empire's millions. For centuries, pirates made it dangerous to use the best trade route, the sea. But in 67 BC, a Roman general named Pompey, armed with special powers from the government, swept pirates from the Mediterranean Sea in just 3 months. Roads, old forts, and crumbling walls show us today how far the Romans travelled in ancient times. But the best clues about their journeys are scattered all over the ancient world, and they're still being dug up even now. For nearly 2,000 years, the roads built by the Roman army were the best way to travel on land. Swift chariots could race across the empire in just days. In fact, the speed of land travel did not improve subsequently until the invention of the automobile. Beasts were not the only things captured in exotic lands to entertain the crowds in the arenas. People, prisoners of war, even whole families were also brought to Rome to serve the empire as slaves. All Roman citizens had the right to wear a toga, but the dress of a senator set him apart from other men. Men of such high rank wore special shoes, and on their togas the clavus latus, the purple stripe of power. According to Roman law, the emperor was just another citizen of the empire. In reality, however, the emperor ruled his subjects like a king, and he expected to be addressed as Augustus, the Latin word for majestic. What was life like in a Roman home? It could be luxurious, with slaves to attend to every need. For many people, however, home was just a cramped, dark apartment in Rome, or a tiny stone hut on a farm. Conquering an empire was one thing, managing it was another. But with the same skill they had shown in training and using an army, the Romans built one of the most efficient government organizations ever devised. Like Sparta, Rome depended on its army, but Rome's legions did more than just win battles and defend the borders from barbarians. They literally built an empire. Life was just as hard for children in Rome as it was for adults, perhaps even harder. Parents were strict, and schoolmasters were infamous for their cruelty. In fact, Romans expected their children to behave like little adults. For wealthy Romans, life could be one extravagant dinner party after another. But there were many other people, especially slaves, who must have envied even the life of a rich man's farm animals. Rich or poor, every Roman woman shared one duty: to bear and raise sons and daughters for the empire. An unmarried woman or a married woman who had no children was considered a failure, even a disgrace to her family. Fine dresses, hair curled with hot irons, makeup and perfume from faraway lands. Wealthy Roman women had all these things and more. In fact, hairstyles changed so often that one Roman artist made sculptures with removable hair, so they could always have the latest style. Cooking and cleaning, spinning and weaving, fetching water and washing. For most Roman women, not just slaves, such tasks filled the average day. But life was not that routinely dull for all. The Romans actually trained some women to fight as gladiators. Women didn't seem to have much power in Rome, where the law gave almost all rights to men. But the wives of emperors, senators, and generals sometimes found ways to change history, even if it meant resorting to murder. Pale skin, rosy cheeks, red lips, and long arched eyebrows were the marks of a beautiful woman in Rome. A wealthy woman had tables covered with cosmetics. Of course, not everyone could afford such luxuries. Poor women probably had just a comb, which they used more likely to remove lice than to style their hair. The Romans probably would have liked the old saying, "A man's home is his castle." The father in a Roman family owned everything and ruled the household like a king. Egypt was Rome's breadbasket, supplying much of the empire's grain. But grain feeds people. A huge bureaucracy like the empire needed another kind of fuel to keep things running: paper. That also came from the land of the pharaohs. Rome's apartments might seem convenient. Many buildings had stores built into them. But imagine living next door to a butcher's shop. Shop customers would also have to be very careful. When people living upstairs needed to get rid of their rubbish and waste, they just dumped it out the window. It should be remembered that not all citizens of the Roman Empire lived in Rome. While city dwellers put up with cramped apartments, filthy streets, and crowded neighborhoods, people in towns and villages had a much more pleasant life. Rome's wealthy citizens ate off shiny silver platters and drank from ornate glass goblets. Most people, however, made do with ordinary dishes, pots, and pans that were made in their neighborhoods by local artisans. Bread and gladiator fights, that's all most people cared about, complained a Roman poet. And the emperors tried to provide a lot of both. In fact, to keep the lower classes happy, emperors gave free grain to hundreds of thousands of people in the city. Rome was not just a city of marble monuments and palaces. Artisans and shopkeepers squeezed into almost every part of it, occupying even apartment buildings and private homes. The city was full of merchants buying and selling goods from all over the empire. The utensils of a good cook haven't changed much since Roman times. In fact, a modern chef would know how to use almost everything in a Roman kitchen. And, except for wondering about electric appliances, a Roman cook would probably feel at home in a modern kitchen. Whatever was on the menu, most Romans ate bread at every meal. Rolls, flat and round loaves. Roman bakers made all kinds of bread. And for dessert, wealthy hosts served their guests cakes sweetened with honey. Roman hosts loved to surprise their guests with exotic foods, like mice cooked in honey, sautéed flamingo tongues, and wild pig baked with live birds inside. Perhaps it was a good idea after all not to tell guests what was really on the menu. Red or white, sweet or dry, the Romans enjoyed all types of wines. "Wine," said one ancient writer, "is life." They drank it in the morning, warmed to take away the chill. It was served with the main daily meal, and was even consumed by the spectators during gladiator fights at the Colosseum. Roman ketchup? Well, the Romans didn't have tomatoes, but they did put a spicy fish sauce on almost everything. And considering some of the foods they ate, perhaps the sauce wasn't as bad as it sounds. A Roman actor didn't need to be handsome to get a leading role, because whenever he appeared on stage, he wore a mask. In fact, some popular actors didn't even speak. They were pantomimers who acted out stories without making a sound. Shouts from the crowd, blaring music, fighting in the stalls and rows of seats. No, this wasn't a scene at a gladiator contest. In Rome, these were the kinds of things that happened at the theatre during most plays. The best roles for Roman actors weren't emperors or generals. They loved to play scheming slaves or crooks who got in and out of all kinds of trouble. And Roman playwrights gave them plenty of such roles to delight the crowds. You might think school is hard today, but try to imagine what it might have been like in ancient Rome. Students spent hours memorizing and reciting Greek and Latin lessons. But still, most pupils never got beyond basic reading, writing and arithmetic, which must have been torture with Roman numerals. A Roman father was the emperor of his home and family. His word was the law, his decisions final. The father even decided if he would accept or reject a new baby. Sons were very welcome. Having a new daughter was often considered a tragedy. Rome was a splendid place to grow up for children from wealthy families. They lived in townhouses with slaves to take care of every need. But for most people, home was a small, crowded apartment, and work was unending hours of back-breaking effort. Much of life in ancient Rome may seem strange to us today, but it's not hard to imagine how Roman children had fun. In fact, you'd probably recognize many of their toys and games. Romans wrote everything by hand with a pen and ink, and of course they didn't have ballpoint pens. They had to dip a reed or metal stylus in an inkwell, and every drop counted because ink was hard to get. Well-educated Romans loved to write. Their letters, diaries, speeches and love poems have lived on for more than 2,000 years. In fact, the art of writing and speaking were the most important goals of an upper-class Roman's education. Finding a good book to read wasn't easy in ancient Rome. In fact, for centuries, Rome didn't even have books. Romans read from long handwritten scrolls, and because the title was at the end, they had to unroll the whole thing just to find out what was inside. Today, governments issue commemorative coins and medallions to honor great leaders and events. Roman emperors used money in the same way. To spread news speedily, they minted new coins, because even in ancient times, money exchanged hands quickly and everyone noticed it. You may think Latin is a dead language, but it's all around you every day. You can find Roman numerals on clocks and in books. Latin is still an important language in courts of law, hospitals and the Catholic Church. In fact, many words in English come from Latin. You could eat the fuel Romans used in their lamps, or cook with it, or use it to take a bath. In fact, olive oil was better for all of those things than it was for burning in lamps. But it was all most Romans had to brighten a dark night. It might be difficult for a person from the 20th century to recognize some things in a Roman house, but the mirrors, combs and cosmetic jars on a woman's dresser haven't changed much. In fact, Roman women had many of the same kinds of makeup that women use today. Romans didn't hang paintings on their walls. They made their walls into paintings. They decorated rooms with portraits of their ancestors, stories about gods and heroes, and scenes from the countryside, which were probably a lot nicer than the real view outside. Stealing water? That sounds strange today, but in ancient Rome, people often tapped into the city aqueducts so they could have running water in their homes. Sometimes so many people stole water that there wasn't enough left to fight fires. An average Roman family did not have many cooking utensils because they didn't even have a kitchen. But people who owned homes often had big kitchens equipped with numerous utensils for preparing exotic meals. What part of a house could be more important than a bathroom? Well, for a rich Roman, having a library full of scrolls was very fashionable and was considered just as impressive as a private bath. Priests and emperors performed religious ceremonies at Rome's great temples. But at home, it was often a sleepy child who, early each morning, played an important role in the rites at the household shrine. Up at dawn, work outside, and then after an evening meal, to bed as night fell. That was what life was like for most Romans, whether they lived in the country or in a city. Even rich and powerful families weren't always happy. Many emperors' sons, daughters and wives got caught up in schemes to take power by murder or even marriage, and suffered as a result. Beware of the dog was probably a common saying in ancient Rome, a city full of dogs, pet birds and other animals. But for most families, pets were not just companions. They had specific jobs to do. Marriage and family life were so valued that emperors issued orders that penalized bachelors. But marrying the right kind of person was very important. Senators and their children weren't allowed to marry anyone who had ever been an actor, or anyone who even came from a family of actors. Diving into a pool was not the only way to take a bath at the baths. Many people there cleaned up or were cleaned out by playing dice and gambling over board games. Roman baths were the world's first full-service health clubs. They offered many comforts and conveniences. But there was one thing they didn't have: soap. Like the Greeks, Romans rubbed their bodies with olive oil and then scraped it off to remove the day's dirt. Admission to the public baths was not restricted to any class of persons. So wealthy Romans who preferred privacy built their own ornate baths in country villas and city townhouses. In fact, having a bath in your home was quite a status symbol. Like modern athletes, Gladiators had special equipment to play their games. Their visored helmets, three-pronged spears, and shiny shields thrilled eager crowds who waited to see who would survive, the quick or the strong. From their cramped, prison-like living quarters, gladiators marched through a dark tunnel towards a bright light. The smell of death from hundreds of animals slaughtered that morning grew stronger with each step. Suddenly they were in the arena, deafened by the roaring crowd, trying not to slip in pools of blood that the sand could no longer absorb. Man against man, team against team. The gladiator games had no rules, no referees, just winners and losers. These were fights to the death, as brutal as any battle fought on the frontiers against the barbarians, and to lose was to die. A gladiator's life was brutal and often short, but before gladiators even entered the arena to fight and die, they had endured long, cruel training sessions where they learned the skills of death. There was just one way for a gladiator to leave the arena alive, by winning. Most succeeded only a few times, then made their final exit in a cart of bodies wheeled through the gate of death. But a few lucky or skillful fighters survived, never to return. Rome is some distance from the sea, but great naval battles were fought there, not to defend the empire from foreign ships, but to entertain crowds. For centuries, glass was considered as precious as fine jewelry. Then, along with gold, spices, and other treasures, the Romans brought back a secret from the East, a new, inexpensive way of making glass. In the large cities like Rome, most people could not cook in their apartments. Instead, they bought bread and took their food to the neighborhood bakery to have it cooked in the big ovens. Ancient Rome was a city of fountains. Most were not just for decoration, however. They were the last part of a vast water system that carried fresh water into many areas and flushed the public toilets. In one sense, it could be said that the Roman Empire never really fell, because many of its greatest accomplishments still stand in Rome and across the Mediterranean world. In fact, some Roman temples, bridges, aqueducts, and roads are still in use today. The pyramids are monuments to the grandeur of ancient Egypt. Elegant columns supported the perfect temples of Greece. But the Roman Empire utilized and expanded from a more practical construction, the soaring arch. Romans sometimes considered it undignified to wear too much jewelry, but they actually liked jewelry as much as any other people, and the empire brought them treasures that were unsurpassed in ancient times. Big and loud. That was how the Romans liked their bands. Of course, music had to be loud, to be heard over the noisy crowds at the chariot races, the theatre, and the gladiator fights in the Colosseum. Like the Greeks, the Romans thought that music was inspired by the gods. Legend said the god Pan invented the shepherd's flute when a woman he was chasing turned into a bunch of reeds. He took the stalks and made the panpipes in her honor.